Hey everyone, it's Alan Schimmel and welcome to TechStrong TV. Today's Tuesday, June 9th, and this is the 50th episode of TechStrong TV. It's a milestone for us. You know, when we started this 50 episodes ago, I don't know if we really knew what we were getting into. You know, everybody was working from home. We wanted to do something. And, you know, our video team of Paul Gustafson and Brian Yaskulka, along with Andy from IT Video Pro, who we added to the team for TechStrong, have worked pretty tirelessly getting this show in and up, you know, on a Monday to Friday basis. And we couldn't do it without them. But we also couldn't do it without Charlene O'Hanlon, our managing editor, who appears every day, and Mitchell Ashley from the Analyst Corner. And then our guest, our regular contributing guest, Mike Vizard on Channel Roundup, Jane Grohl from the DevOps Institute, and of course our good friend John Willis, who every Tuesday usually gives us an amazing interview or two. John and Damon on DevOps Cafe podcast as well. But let's, we couldn't do it without them, and the show's been just great. We hope you're enjoying it. As I mentioned last week, with the TechStrong Con conference going off last Thursday, we're really going to start moving now to TechStrong TV on a 3-day-a-week basis. We'll probably replay some of the first 50 shows that we've done on the off days, which will be Wednesday and Friday. Fresh shows will be shown on Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday. So we'll get used to that cadence and see how it works. Look, this is an experiment. We're in the lab here doing this. I don't know of too many tech media companies that are doing this on this kind of a consistent basis at this kind of clip. So we'll see. I'd love to hear your feedback. What would you like to see? Is 1 day a week enough? 3 days a week? 5 days a week? What kind of content would you like? This isn't meant to replace our webinars, our virtual conferences. So let us know. You can let us know, by the way, on the site at techstrong.tv or on our community Slack at techstrongtv.slack.com. You can even just write me at editor@devops.com. But anyway, let me tell you what we've got in store for us today here on this Tuesday. Number one, I'm happy to be joined and introduce you to a new company. Well, it's not a new company per se, but new to our audience. And that's the good folks at Lenses.io. I have Andrew Stevenson, CTO there, and he's going to tell us a little bit about data ops for engineers, Kafka, Apache, more, and kind of what the Lenses use cases are. I think you'll enjoy finding out more about Lenses. And then after Andrew, I'm joined by one of my friends from the cybersecurity space. You know, the really, really bright woman. I always enjoy talking to her. My friend Caroline Wong. Caroline is the Chief Strategy Officer at Cobalt.io, one of the leaders in pen test as a service. And they've just done, I think it's their 4th or 5th annual survey on the state of pen testing. And Carolyn has some great insights that the survey brought up, and we're going to talk about that, as well as the whole AppSec and pen test market in general. Good interview with Caroline Wong. Then I'd like to introduce you to another company that we really haven't covered much here in TechStrong TV or in Media Ops Properties. The name of that company is Launch Darkly, and I'm meeting with their CEO, Edith Harbaugh. And Edith, much like Carolyn Wong, really bright woman with some really great chops and experience in the tech industry. And Launch Darkly, of course, is all about feature flags, and they're really doing an amazing job. And if you don't know what feature flags are, they really give DevOps teams fine-grained control to turn on and turn off new features that have been put into new releases, to roll back, etc. And they've really caught on, right? The folks at Launch Darkly, I don't know how many millions of feature flags they're responsible for, but Edith is going to give us good insight into feature flags, and if you're not familiar with them, why you really need to be. And then we're going to go back, for our something old archives. It's not that old. It's from TechStrong Con last week. I'm really happy to put up a presentation that was given by Liz Rice. Now, Liz, of course, is a board member of CNCF, and she's also with the Aqua Security folks. And Liz's presentation at TechStrong Con was on container images. Small is beautiful. Why keeping your container images smaller is a smart idea. As I mentioned, this is from TechStrong Con that happened last week. We've already shown William Hurley's plenary keynote on quantum computing. We've done Emmett Keefe from who did the keynote on what, in a post-COVID world, what's happening, and he was courses from Insight Partners and Insight Ignite. And then we also featured Andrew Schaefer, who really gave one from the heart on what can I do about what the current state of racism and what's going on in our world and what we can do and how it's affecting us. So this is the fourth of the fourth keynotes here from Liz. We'll have more TechStrong Con content over the weeks, but I wanted to do the four keynotes out of the way first. And if you've ever heard Liz present or anything, she's absolutely brilliant. I think you're going to really enjoy her presentation. Then after Liz, I'll be back with the news as usual, just some headlines of what's going around. And then we're going to head it over to Charlene. Charlene has lined up John Kim, CEO at Sendbird, and it's the impact of messaging platforms in the wake of COVID. And then after that, we will send things over to Mitchell Ashley. And Mitchell, usual from the Analyst Corner, will give us some commentary and updates, and then I'll be back to wrap things up. So, sounds like it'll be a full Tuesday show. Hope you're going to enjoy it. We're going to take a quick commercial break, and I'll be right back.
DevOps.com is the #1 online destination for DevOps education and community building. DevOps.com covers all aspects of DevOps, including DevOps best practices and tools, DevOps culture, DevSecOps, business impact, continuous testing, continuous delivery, and more. DevOps.com has the largest collection of original DevOps content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.devops.com to learn more. DevOps.com, where the world meets DevOps.
Back here in the studio, our next guest is Andrew Stevenson, CTO at Lenses.io or Lenses.io. And, data ops has really become more than a buzzword. I think people are really starting to understand the relationship between data, applications, data, and DevOps, and how we need to do a better job. There's lots of big data and database applications, stuff like Kafka, and stuff like that. Lenses.io to me represents sort of this new breed of company that is coming into this space and really kind of changing it the way many of the DevOps pioneers changed DevOps. So let's now go to my interview with Andrew Stevenson of Lenses.io.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us on this segment. My guest for this segment is Andrew Stevenson. Andrew is the CTO at Lenses.io. Hey Andrew, welcome to TechStrong TV.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Fantastic. So Andrew, I don't think we've exposed our audience. That's a bad word. I don't think we've had the chance to tell our audience a little bit about Lenses.io. And so if you don't mind, if we could start off our interview today with a little background on Lenses.io, and if you wouldn't, or Lenses.io, and if you wouldn't mind kind of weave in your own personal journey and story into how you wind up here today with us.
Yeah, sure. So I'll start with Lenses and what we're doing. So data is becoming a product, and everyone's trying to utilize businesses certainly in this current time are increasing digitalization, And more so, they're trying to drive new revenue off real-time data. So to do this, a lot of them are moving towards open source technologies such as Apache Kafka, which is at the heart of what we're doing at Lenses.io. However, a lot of them are really struggling. You know, it's complicated technology. Just because it's open source and it's very nice doesn't mean that it's easy to use. So what we're doing at Lenses.io is trying to take out the pain, the cost, and the complexity from actually operating real-time streams of data. And in essence, what I really want to do is get back to driving technology to help business. Technology is an enabler of that. So what we do is we have a workspace. It's a developer workspace that allows developers and anybody with any SQL skills to actually get on board and deliver faster applications. So at the heart of it, we have our SQL engine. This is our own SQL engine we've built on top of Apache Kafka and other systems. So that makes it really, really powerful for people to actually explore and process the data and bring business context to the data. A good example of that is one of our customers, Babylon Health. So they're really focused on delivering healthcare and actually expanding healthcare into the third world. And what they really want to focus on is using technology to enable the doctors and the nurses to be more efficient, rather than just focusing on the technology and rather than just focusing on debating which programming language is better. So we're there to enable them to actually succeed with data. And my own personal experience of how I got there, I started off life as a civil engineer, actually. That's where I was classically trained at university to do. However, I always ended up either collecting data or actually working and designing with computers. From that, I actually went on to become a C++ programmer. I moved into high frequency trading, actually, and then I went into the investment banking scene in the UK. So this was when big data was becoming a lot of hype, actually, and we were trying to implement a lot of solutions with big data, Kafka being one of them, Spark being another, and trying to make it work in a large enterprise organization where compliance and security are top of the agenda, right? You're not going into production unless you actually secure your platform. But one of the reasons I actually started Lenses.io, and I actually met Antonios, who's the CEO at the time, he was working with me in these banks, was to actually get back to business success. When I was working at a high frequency trading firm, I saw great success by bringing people with business context in and giving them the access to the data. They're the quants, right? You know, they're the market traders. They know about option theory. I don't. I'm a technologist. And I saw this gap. So we started building out open source connectors, actually part of Kafka Connect framework, building open source UI. So if you've used if you've used Kafka, you've probably come across some of our open source components. And from there, we said, okay, you know, we can do better. We can actually help organizations succeed with real-time streaming data, and we went on to found Lenses.io.
Excellent. That's great. So, you know, we hear so much recently, and I think unfortunately the whole COVID thing might have allowed us to take our eye off the ball a little bit. But there was so much momentum building around, you know, so-called data ops, and the whole movement towards, hey, remember, it's about the data, stupid, right? And it's, you know, how important and paramount the data is. And then, of course, how it relates to DevOps, right? And we've had articles on DevOps.com. Is DevOps and data ops, are they incompatible? Are they, you know, how do they complement each other? How do you do DevOps with data and data ops? And, you know, and we shouldn't lose sight of how important, of course, this is. But I think, Andrew, you hit some really important points here that, look, tools like Apache Kafka, no one's saying it's a bad open source tool. I mean, where would we be without it in a lot of ways with data? But certainly it can be a daunting challenge, and when technical skills are at such a premium, right, such as maybe an Apache Kafka experienced person, it could be a real impediment for organizations.
It's a real challenge, and I've seen that throughout my career. That I've been at companies where, yes, some have been very, very, very skilled, and they're able to take this open source technology and support and maintain it. However, I've seen other companies that want to be data driven, yet they've really, really struggled to first hire the developers who know anything about it, and second, retain them. But yet they have a really, really strong skill set. I've worked in energy trading as well, and they really, really know what they're talking about, but they struggle to adopt the technology. And I think actually, now Satya Nadella from Microsoft, he mentioned the other few months ago, tech intensity. I think we're now at an age of tech intensity, actually, where clouds, a lot of them are providing a lot of the platforms to take out the heavy lifting for the infrastructure, and we can really start focusing back onto the data. So everyone can take advantage of it. It doesn't matter what organization you are. You don't have to be, in my case, a high frequency trader that can attract the best talent. You can do it no matter what your industry is and benefit from data. And I think on your point about data ops, I think, well, data ops, in our view, with DevOps sit hand in hand together, right? You want to take the best practices out of any manifesto and apply them. It's also my view that technologists, they reinvent the wheel for sometimes no reason, right? They're just chasing technology for the sake of it. So for me, data ops incorporates everything about DevOps, right? It's a culture. It's about bringing data scientists together with the data engineers. It's about incorporating things like GitOps as well, so we can push in the optimization that was lacking before for example, when I worked in a data warehousing world.
Absolutely. You brought up another point here that I'd like us to dig in, if we can, a little bit, Andrew. And that is, I do think, look, I've seen it in most of my career in technology, and I'm guilty. I'm the first to raise my hand. This shiny trinket syndrome, where we go after the latest innovation, the latest technology, and it's almost like we want to use technology for technology's sake. And sometimes we forget, right, that the technology serves the master, and the master is the business, right? And that's why we do the technology, not just because it's cool, or not just because it's new or interesting, but because it helps us make our business better. And I think that's been something that, I know that's something the lens is, right?
Yeah, we've seen it. I think I've been guilty of it myself. We've all been guilty of
We all are.
technology. There was a very good co-worker I used to work with, and he used to call it resume plus plus. Right? People were just going around chasing technology to put on the CV.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's true. But I think we now have the opportunity, like I say, with the tech intensity that's there, the clouds, even with Kafka. I can go to any cloud now and get a managed Kafka. I can get managed Kubernetes. I can get managed databases. I can get Key Vaults, everything I need that I can focus back on, what's important. Building data products, to help the business. So if we take COVID, right, it doesn't matter how good the technology is, if we can't get it to the doctors and nurses, the health professionals who actually understand it, then we're going nowhere. So technology is great. I built my career on technology, but it really is, I think now it should be an enabler, and we often lose sight of that.
Absolutely. Let's bring it back to lenses a little bit. You cited one example here, obviously with healthcare. Can you give us a couple other sort of use cases that you guys you have customers working on and where it's really helped? You don't have to name names of companies.
Yeah, so we have a wide range of customers, from multinationals to startups, big retailers in Fortune 5, across to banking and insurance. So there's one good example we have actually, that's Vortexa. Vortexa, they do energy commodity trading. They're basically tracking ships and then trying to figure out where the ships are going to go, and then they run predictive models to try and effectively trade and sell that data on to different parties that they have. So what they actually found was that they went to Kafka for obvious reasons. They want to have a real-time stream of data. But what they actually found was that, first of all, running Kafka by themselves was giving them what they would call Kafka Fridays. Things would go wrong and they'd have problems. So they actually moved to MSK. But they didn't actually know what they'd done. They didn't realize how much of a mess they'd actually made until they put Lenses on top. So Lenses was able to give them visibility not only on their topics and the ability to query those topics with our SQL engine, but also visualize the topology, the application landscape of what they'd done. And they suddenly saw the complexity of what they were able to do. And we actually then also helped them automate and simplify a lot of the admin process. So they remove the bottlenecks from a platform team, because this is quite common. It happens quite a lot. You end up with a platform team becoming a bottleneck. So we leave that for them, shed light onto their entire system, and help them optimize their entire flows.
Excellent, excellent, excellent. I mentioned COVID earlier. I feel like we almost obligatorily have to ask. So how are things going during this whole transition of people working remotely from home and, different priorities for different projects? How has that affected Lenses IO and what's happening?
So we've benefited from the fact that we were remote working from the first. We've always been that way. So actually working from home hasn't impacted our engineering capabilities. What we're seeing is that it impacts most the customers who are not ready yet to do digitalizations. Those that have benefited. And actually Lenses helps here, because part of what we offer is self-service. So actually having a self-service multi-tenant solution on top of Kafka means that you don't actually need a centralized team to manage it, and teams can just get on and function normally.
Absolutely. You mentioned that was it contributed code to Kafka and so forth? Is the Lenses team contributing code, or you're part of, how do you interact there?
We have in the past, what we've mainly done is contribute code around on the ecosystem, actually. So if you look at what we have a set of Kafka connectors out there. I think they've got around 600 stars. We have a really very popular Docker images. We have open source UI. So we generally help build up around the ecosystem. But our view is that Kafka, it's now an engine, right? We want to swap it out. Maybe you want to go onto Apache Pulsar. Maybe you want to go onto Redis Streams. We see there's lots of providers of Kafka out there. Our focus, like I say, is really on the data layer. And that's where we think the real value is now that we have this age of tech intensity.
Sure. Andrew, a couple other questions, if you don't mind. Let's talk about, as you said, companies that were already kind of moving along their transformation to the cloud and in terms of data, they're not suffering terribly, assuming their underlying business is sound, right? It's not just about that. But for companies who haven't, maybe they're watching this and they're already starting to plan, what do I do to get this transformation going? Beyond, the obvious of, well, you should become a Lenses IO customer. Can you give them a roadmap, if you can, a little bit, a couple, 3 or 4 or 5 steps to take along this path to be able to do it?
Yeah, sure. So, if I would always look at, first of all, what do you need? Be pragmatic about what you need. First of all, do you need open source technology? Do you need the scale of sometimes and the complexity that these technologies require? Are you at the Facebook scale that you have millions of messages a second you need to have? But look at what technologies are out there. For me, look towards a cloud strategy. But I think importantly, I'm a big believer of the data mesh now, actually looking at technologies and putting together cross-functional teams that are built around the data ops approach. So you can actually deliver data as a product. And that's I think, if you have those foundations, you will ultimately succeed. Where I have seen companies struggle is they'll adopt one rigid platform and they'll try to put on every single use case and have that strictly controlled by a strict data engineering teams, rather than making it cross-functional and really bringing on the business context into it.
Fantastic.
The product, right?
Yeah, good stuff. Andrew, we're about out of time. You know what I didn't realize? I mean, I referred to it as lenses.io, right? So I'm hoping people get that as a clue to go to the website. It's lenses.io.
Yeah.
Is the website where people can go. And I also, we didn't really you're one of the co-founders along with the CEO. If I'm not mistaken, you guys are based over in UK. Is that true? And then you have some folks here in the US?
Antonius and Christina are in the UK, although they are planning to move to New York.
Really? Okay.
But we have, like say, we're a remote company, so we have people all over Europe. I'm personally in the Netherlands, actually. I'm British, but I live in the Netherlands. So we are scattered around.
Got it. But if you were doing that before, it's not a big deal to keep doing what you're doing, right?
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Hey, Andrew, I want to thank you for joining us and introducing our audience to Lenses.io today. We'd like to have you back on. Maybe we can talk more about this and really explore the whole data kind of thing, because it is, there was a lot of momentum, and then I do almost feel with COVID, maybe some people have taken their eye off the ball here, but they're going to need, if they're going to come through to the other side of things, we need to keep our eye on this prize. And I think Lenses.io is a company that can help people do that.
Yeah, for me, it's all around data context. And if people want to get started with our platform, they can go to lenses.io. And we have a Docker, you can get started there, and everything's set up for you as well. And we have an online portal.
Fantastic, man. Hey, keep up the great work, Andrew, and good luck with Lenses.io.
Yeah. Okay.
All right.
Thanks.
Thank you. This is Alan Schimmel for TechStrong TV, and we're going to be right back with our next guest.
With the COVID-19 pandemic, it is important to protect yourself and others from spreading the virus. Prevention and personal safety is key. Here are the top ways you can protect yourself and others. Wash your hands often with soap and water for at least 20 seconds. Avoid touching your face. Practice social distancing and avoid high-risk potential people. If you are showing symptoms, stay at home. If you must go out, wear a face mask. Always cover coughs and sneezes with a tissue, or use the inside of your elbow. Clean and sanitize frequently touched surfaces daily. Together, we can prevent this pandemic.
So there are certain people that I enjoy interviewing and interacting with, especially my friends in the cybersecurity world. And within that world, one of the people who I don't get a chance to talk to enough, quite frankly, but when I do, I'm reminded of why I like speaking to her so much, is Caroline Wang. Caroline is a chief strategy officer now, and congratulations on that role, for Cobalt.io. And Cobalt.io, of course, is one of the leaders in pen testing as a service. For the last 4 or 5 years, they've also been doing a good survey and report on the kind of the state of pen testing. And they just released this year's report. It has some great findings and insights. And I had a good chance to talk to Caroline about it and just the whole state of pen testing and AppSec in general. So here's my interview with Caroline Wang. Enjoy.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us on this session for TechStrong TV. My guest right now is actually a friend of mine who I've had the pleasure of knowing, at least 5 years, if not more. She's also one of the brightest people in the cyberspace, for my money. But her name is Caroline Wang, and Caroline is the Chief Strategy Officer now at Cobalt, and that's Cobalt.io. Carolyn, welcome.
Alan, thank you so much for having me. It's always great to connect with you.
Absolutely. Well, it's not as great as it is for me. I always tell people I wish I could talk to Carolyn more. We don't get a chance. So Carolyn, we were talking a little off camera. You recently sort of got a new title and a promotion in Chief Strategy Officer. And in today's world, frankly, titles get cheap. Right? You'd rather give people a title than money sometimes. Everyone makes up their own title, it seems. I used to be a chief strategy officer. It's still secure, so I love that title. But, there's chief strategy officers and then there's chief strategy officers. Share with us a little. What does chief strategy officer at Cobalt mean?
Yes, so Cobalt.io is a pen test as a service company. We're a startup. We were founded in 2013, and I joined the company in 2016. Today, in my role as Chief Strategy Officer, I actually oversee strategy as well as security, as well as people, which is like the new word for human resources. So
Right.
what happened is over the last year or so, our company has grown from about 50 to about 100 people. And so sort of the people function is incredibly important, right? What is the strategy as we grow our company from 100 to the next 100 to 1,000? And so that's what I have a lot to do with values and culture at Cobalt.
You have a lot to do with a lot, Carolyn. Because the HR function is, and especially in a company growing at this clip, right? It's a lot to do that because it's more than just hiring or firing or making sure everyone gets on their benefits and their payrolls. It's also, as you mentioned, instilling a culture, right? And just a way of who we are. Right, and it's something that people have to get when they first come on. But what I have found, and I've had the pleasure of working and helping build a few companies, every person who comes on changes it in a little bit of a way. And then you look back and say, wow, these last 20 people have really made some changes here, and they may be good, bad, or whatever. But it's a living, breathing, evolving organism, right? And that's something people don't understand always about culture. They think, oh, we're going to instill a culture here from the top down. No, a culture is the people. And that's why I love the term people instead of HR.
Yeah, it's interesting because culture, like security actually, is an emergent property. It's not something that you bolt on. It's not something that you write down and you can simply expect to happen. It is emergent. And because of that, there are many different interlocking things that need to happen in order to get a desired result.
Yeah. But I also don't want to minimize the people thing is huge, right? The strategy thing is huge, right? Because trying to help define and chart the course of how a fast growing startup like this, right? Where they're going, who you are, where, what is the market telling you and what are you telling market is, all wrapped into that strategy kind of portfolio. But then on top of that, when you're a security company like Cobalt.io is, and you also run security for Cobalt.io, well, that's kind of a full-time gig too, right? There's a lot of responsibility on those shoulders.
It is. Thank you. And I will say I have an amazing team behind me and with me. And that, I really see my job as a people team leader, as a security leader to support those folks. I work with amazing people and I'm so proud to do so.
Fantastic. So Carolyn, we were going to talk about Cobalt recently did a little survey, not a little survey, Cobalt did a survey, and you're going to hopefully share a little bit about the survey and some of the results with our audience, if it's okay.
Yes, absolutely. So We are now publishing our State of Pen Testing 2020. This is actually, this is the fourth year we've done this report. So it started out as a pen test metrics report. One of the things that was very attractive to me about Cobalt when I first joined was the fact that you've got a pen test platform. And so you have access to all this data. And we now have done something like 2,500 pen tests. And so we have the advantage of being able to analyze and gain insights from all of this data. So for 4 years, we've been doing this. And this year we found out that misconfiguration is the top vulnerability type discovered by our pen testers for the fourth year in a row. Last year in State of Pen Testing, we did a deep dive into misconfiguration. And this year we went in a little bit of a different direction. We actually did an analysis to say what types of security vulnerabilities can be found by humans and which types of security vulnerabilities can be found by machines. To date, there's actually been very little research in this area.
Mm-hmm. So talk to us. What kind can be found by humans versus machine? Well, before you tell us that, why is it important to know what can be found by humans and what can be found by machines?
Yes, it's important to know because pen testing and any sort of application security program, it's not just about finding vulnerabilities, it's also about fixing them. So in order to put together this report, we looked at a few different things. One of them is all of this tremendous pen test data that we have over the last several years. We also did a survey with more than 100 respondents in security, development, DevOps, and management roles. And we actually found out a couple of exciting things. So one that we found out, which, Alan, you and I know this, and it's always cool to see it in the data. So organizations are making the transition from DevOps to DevSecOps, and they're embracing this like everyone is a part of the security team approach. We actually found that the majority of respondents, 78%, reported a strong relationship between security and engineering. We also found out that, not to our surprise, I think, more than a third, 37%, of respondents release software weekly or daily. And 52% of pen test applications are pen tested at least quarterly. So this is the backdrop for asking that question, why does it matter what humans can find and what machines can find? Because anyone who's building an application security program and doing DevSecOps needs to figure out, what do I do with scanners and what do I do with pen testers? And how do I manage that, right? This is about resource allocation. This is about budgets and investment. So that's why we decided to ask the question.
Absolutely. And also, I mean, not to get all, future-y and automation's going to put us out of work stuff. That's not the game here. But the fact is, when you have, 30-something% putting out software weekly or daily, right? That's so much software that's being released, right? Written and released constantly, or not constantly, let's say continuously is a better word. And you only have finite human resources, right? Whether it's security pen testers, which are really at a premium, right? You want to go hire human pen testers, good luck, right? So you almost, if you're going to keep up with that load of release, of continuous release, you have to automate. And then if you have to automate, you better damn well understand what you can automate and do well from a pen test perspective, and what you're still going to need your people for, right? Because you can't afford to waste people or to waste those people's times, right, doing things that can be or should be done in an automated fashion. And so in order to scale to meet the market demand that you're obviously saying in this survey, I would imagine you have to know what can I automate, what makes sense to automate, what doesn't. And it's the same thing people are saying in QA testing, right? Unit testing and the traditional QA. You're not going to automate 100% of stuff. It just doesn't work like that. You're not going to automate 100% of pen testing, but you got to know what you can and should.
That is exactly right. And Alan, I mean, you just hit it on the nail, because you're right. Even if you take the security part out and you're just talking about software testing and you're talking about QA testing, integration tests, performance tests, unit testing, perfect candidates for automation. But things like story level testing, user acceptance testing, that has to be done by a person with an opinion. And this actually, you know, there is there's a similar story, of course, on the security side. Scanners are really good at finding things that computers can do. They can do things like they can inject malicious payloads, they can evaluate arguments and function calls, they can test access points and communicate with the front end, you know. But what humans have to do is humans find business logic bypasses, humans find race conditions, humans find chained exploits. So if you've got a business logic bypass that allows someone to change the price of something being sold online, a machine's not going to tell you that. If someone is abusing a weak password recovery flow, a person's got to tell you that, right? Going around any kind of approval flow, whether it is who has access to what, who can do what, under what circumstances. And so these are really kind of the two broad categories of, well, what can machines do and what are their limitations, and what must humans do? And this, we think, is really powerful information for development and security leaders to understand as they put together their strategy for DevSecOps.
Agreed. And also, this goes to the heart of what makes Cobalt.io, right? Is you have both the automated and the human element here, right? That gives it context, that goes that, you know, whatever it is, whether it's the 20% on top of automated or 30%, we could argue that all day. But whatever the percentage is that can't be automated, right? And quite frankly, there are a lot of organizations, I'm sure among the 2,500 or more that you guys have worked with, who don't have the resources to bring in those kinds of human talent, you know, the human level, the human talent, to do that job.
So traditionally, what pen testing has looked like, traditionally, if you're an organization, you want to bring in human technical effort, you had two choices in the past. You could either hire an internal pen test team. That's very hard to do. We have a severe skills shortage, very expensive. And then the reality is, you know, you hire someone to join your team. Next year, they get a better job offer from someone else. And then, and that's something that a lot of hiring managers have to contemplate. You know, the alternative historically has been you work with a traditional consulting firm, right? And you're talking about these extensive SOWs and these customized projects, and that gets very expensive. That does not fit in a world where software is being developed and released on a daily and a weekly cadence. That's when people need on-demand manual pen testing. We have a credits model. And so we're really kind of, I would say, serving the DevOps community and giving folks high quality manual pen testing on demand. That is the whole Cobalt value proposition.
Yeah, absolutely. But also wrapped in a, because I've been in security obviously many years, right? And it used to be that, you know, when you hired an external pen tester to come in and do a pen test, right? You know, he had his little Felix the cat bag of tricks, right, around Metasploit and maybe some other stuff. But each one kind of, it wasn't cookie cutter, it wasn't standardized. Each one sort of had their own, it was like very Wild Westy, right? I have a Colt and Western, and you have a Smith & Wesson, or I had a Colt, or I don't know enough about guns to tell you all the different brands. I'm sorry. But, yeah. So, and it's a good thing. But anyway, you know, each hired gun had their own favorite model, so to speak, and their own, you know, ammunition and caliber and how they did their pen test. The nice thing about a Cobalt.io is, you have a wide bench of these pen testing people, but B, they're also using a standardized platform. So whether pen tester A or pen tester B does your pen test, it's the Cobalt IO kind of. That's the great equalizer, the standardizer.
And it has been this total, previously, every pen test consulting company does it different. Every individual pen tester does it different. The platform, the software platform, the SaaS platform, it does a couple of really cool things. And one of them is we're bringing together security and development folks so that they interact through the platform. They're talking the whole time about what is this application supposed to do? Oh, you found this security issue? How am I supposed to fix it? We have this SaaS model that says, look, if your pen test finishes in the next 2 weeks, but you don't get around to fixing something for another 6 months, when you do fix it, come let us know, change a little flag in the platform, and we will go and retest it for you. And we will validate
Just that. We don't have to
test.
retest the whole thing, just that.
Exactly. So we do the retesting unit by unit and on demand, and that's all included because it's a SaaS platform, which is very different from the way that these things have traditionally been done, with SOWs and so forth.
That reminds me, Carolyn, of something we're seeing a lot of in DevOps now. There's feature flags, right? You set your feature flags, and if you got to roll something back or turn something off, you don't have to roll the whole darn thing. You just, this individual feature flag, we're going to turn on and off this. And the more flags you use, the more granular kind of the control you have. Same thing here, right? I don't have to run the whole pen test. I just need to run this one little thing. Fantastic. We haven't spoken enough about the survey, though. Let's dive back in. So we have automated and humans. Where are we? What else do we have in the survey?
So we also talk a lot about how, these things, they have to be taken with a grain of salt. So ultimately, the answer, of course, is that we want humans and machines working together. And one of the things that, if I gave you a list, and this report does include a list, if I gave you a list of things humans are really good at, it's kind of a short list. If I give you a list of things machines are good at, it's kind of a long list. So, at first you're like, okay, well, we should be doing a lot of machines, and that's true. The thing is, there's a hidden work effort a lot of time to what the machines can find, because there's a lot of false positives, for example. There's a lot of filtering that needs to go on. A human can determine if a vulnerability is in a position to be exploited. A scanner will not have that context until after the scanner finds a result, and then a human can review it and say, yeah, this is legit, or actually, no, this is a false positive. We don't even need to worry about that. Sure. So then you've got your machine doing the work and then a human following up afterwards. So there is kind of this hidden work factor that we also discuss in the report.
Okay. And that goes to prioritization. So back at Still Secure, when I, was Chief Strategy Officer, we had a vulnerability management program and workflow. And in a similar vein, it was the same sort of thing. The scanner would turn up, a phone book full of vulnerabilities. But a lot of times it really took a human to prioritize, right? This is exploitable, this is reachable, this is a false positive, or, these are the ones you're going to get the greatest bang for your buck kind of thing, which you could put rules in that you can kind of, that's not really machine learning, but you could put in algorithms that help with that. But ultimately, the kind of stuff you're talking about, you need that human. And that's why I said before, whether it's just the 10% on top or 20% on top, it may not be the majority that the human has to do, but it's the highest value, because without it, this stuff is a lot less relevant.
That's right. There's got to be context, and that context, we can customize and tune our tools, which is human effort to do that. Right. And that's fine, right? We can tell them the context, and then afterwards we can overlay the context. But right now what we've got, Cobalt really offers this platform that enables the manual effort. And we're trying to make that really efficient so that folks don't get bogged down in figuring out how to work together. They can just, work together. In 24 hours, you can get a pen test started.
Absolutely. Great. What else do we have in the survey?
So in the survey, we also have, as I mentioned, we surveyed about 100 different folks, and we found out some really interesting things. So one of the questions we ask is, who's doing pen testing and for what reasons? So historically, as you may expect, people would pen test for compliance reasons. I've got to do this for PCI. I've got to do this because my enterprise customer is demanding it. These are compliance related reasons. We've actually seen a shift in the last 3 years such that people are doing it because, surprise, they actually care about application security. And that actually, it turns the exercise into something completely new. It's no longer a check the box, download my PDF report, send it over to the auditor. Now it's actually like, I care about security because I care about my customers. I care about the data. I care about the impact that it has to my organization. And that's why folks are doing it. We're also seeing people are pen testing a lot of different types of targets. They're pen testing web apps, mobile apps, network. We're actually seeing a lot of cloud configuration and cloud assessment work. So that was another thing that I think is not a surprise when I say it, but again, it's very exciting to see the data emerge.
Yeah. So to me, Carolyn, this is all about, again, one of the reasons I got into DevSecOps and started DevOps.com. And that was that the whole the whole security moving into dev and DevOps. And we've said it before, it's the Q word, quality, right? When people understand that security is synonymous with quality, they'll give a crap about security over and above compliance and that kind of stuff, right? And I think that's really what we're starting to see. People are realizing if you release unsecure code, it's crappy code. It's low quality code. And your customers suffer, your company and brand suffers. Ultimately, you suffer, right? No one says, geez, I can't wait to get some crappy code out there because I had to get it out in time, right? But security people used to have that mindset that's what those guys said, right? Those developers, they just care about getting it out on time. They don't care, but they do care, and I think that's why we're seeing it. Who actually is running these scans, though? Is it developers and DevOps teams, or is it the security folks? Like, who's kicking them off?
This is really interesting. And, outside of the report, I've had a lot of different conversations with security leaders, with development leaders. And I find that, one of the things about developers is they like to do stuff themselves. They like to have control. They like to talk to an API. They like to work in the systems that they're already working in. And so some of the organizations that I've seen been very successful with automated scanning does put it in the hands of the developers. I've talked to organizations who've created APIs for developers to work with. I think that sometimes a well-intentioned security person runs a scan, doesn't necessarily have the context, sends a report over, right? Alan, you talked about, a report this thick with hundreds, maybe thousands of vulnerabilities, emails it over to a technology leader, and the recipient opens it and says, what am I supposed to do with this, right? It's overwhelming. It's not clear what the next steps are. It's not clear how to proceed. And that is the heart of a fundamental miscommunication that we've seen time and time again over the last decade between security folks and development folks.
I agree. And I think that, unfortunately, pretty much summed up my career in security because that's the stage we were at, right? We would deliver that huge phone book and we'd say, well, don't worry, we're going to help you prioritize this and get busy. And and they'd say, okay, why don't you run a scan 2 years from now again and let us know, right? And I'd say, no, we got to run a scan at least every quarter. And no, that didn't work. But it is interesting that we're seeing it. Another thing that I think we're seeing, Carolyn, especially around this is the automated part of it, is building the automated scan into that pipeline, right? Whether it's at the time of deployment, like with the Jenkins thing, or maybe when code is committed, there's some sort of scanning going on, that can be automated, but then kick up what needs to get kicked up, perhaps to a real person to deal with. And I think that's been a huge help in helping us get better quality code.
Yes. So actually, Alan, before I joined Cobalt in 2016, I was doing this thing called BSIM assessments, building security and maturity models, something started out by Gary McGraw and Sammy Miguez and Jacob West. And I was a BSIM assessor at Cigital, which is now part of Synopsys. And during that time, I did more than 36 BSIM assessments. And there's a whole section on code review in the BSIM. And we actually found that a lot of the organizations who were most effective doing their code review processes were the ones who had it built into their CI/CD pipeline. And on top of that, the folks who had it highly customized. There are all sorts of gotchas, right? Some organizations have it set up so that it's optional for the developers to do it. Some have it so that the developers are the ones who can say what's a false positive and what's not. Others have very rigid KPIs for it's got to have a clean scan.
Who's going to sign off, right?
Exactly. So this actually comes to one of those things, which is sign off and approval for some things can be done via automated means, right? Hey, I'm looking at a decision coming into me, and does it fit clearly into one of these very well-known categories? If it doesn't, that needs to be escalated to a person who needs to apply some judgment. And I think that's very interesting.
Absolutely. So, Carolyn, I envision, this whole DevSecOps thing, right? It gets me going. So I envision a day, though, where those automated scans and tests that are built into our CI/CD pipeline are just one stop on a continuum that goes all the way through to deployment, and then post-deployment pen testing and vulnerability scanning and environmental scans, as you mentioned, network and even cloud config and stuff like that. And that it's all part of our security quality testing, right? That somehow you get not a single pane of glass, perhaps, but some sort of context, whether it's in time, series data, or whatever, of your security posture, of your risk, right? Going through all that. How close are we? You think that's Cobalt delivers that one day, or that's not really part of that mission?
I think we're getting there. So here's what practitioners want. Practitioners want to know where are the true positives and which ones matter. And that is something that's super hard to do, right? It's super hard to say, I've done a perfect pen test. How do I know that I have found all the true positives? That's something that we're working on. How do you do coverage? How do you ensure activity? And that's very hard to do. But I think that in the future, what's possible is you have automated testing layered with manual penetration testing. And then you look at things like threat intelligence on top of that. Right? What are the active exploits that folks are seeing in the wild, and how can you use that type of information? And so I think there's a number of directions that this can go in. One of the things that as Chief Strategy Officer, I'm a huge proponent of is focus. So right now what we're trying to do is we're trying to be the #1 pen test company in the world. And that is separate from...
Good job.
Thank you. That's separate from also layering on top all of these other things, but I think in the future, we have a lot of very exciting partnership opportunities. We have a lot of very exciting, platform integration opportunities.
Fantastic. All right. We've gone way over time, but what else, anything else in the survey we haven't hit on that you think we should jump into?
There's really these 3 parts, and I'll simply summarize them again. One of them is we always publish what are the different categories of vulnerabilities that have been found during the past year. Misconfig for the 4th year in a row. And I would also recommend that folks take a look at our 2019 report where we did a deep dive into misconfig. Beyond that, from the survey, what emerged is pen testing is really being done more for actual application security, whereas in the past, compliance had been the main driver.
I'm glad to hear that.
Yep. It's people are doing pen testing on all sorts of different targets. Web, app, mobile, API, network, cloud is a big part of it. And then finally, we actually see, and this is something that's heartening to learn, security and developers, that relationship really is changing. It really is getting better. So that's the survey stuff. And then we've got all sorts of additional detail on Well, what are humans good at finding and what are machines good at finding? Again, prior to this report, there's really been very little research in this particular area. I'm thrilled that we could do a deep analysis of this and provide this to the community.
Cobalt, bringing the good news to the DevSecOps space today, man. You're doing my heart good, Carolyn. Excellent. Excellent stuff. Hey, I promised you we were going to do 20 minutes. I think we're over 30 minutes. So we're gonna have to call it a wrap on this, but it's been too long since I've spoken with you. Come back on soon. Promise? Okay. Carolyn Wong, Chief Strategy Officer for Cobalt.io here on TechStrong TV. This is Alan Schimmel. We'll be right back with our next guest in a moment.
ContainerJournal.com is the leading online destination for centralized computing-related content. ContainerJournal.com covers all aspects of software containers, from container management, data management for containers, container security, networking for containers, to the entire container ecosystem, Kubernetes, microservices, serverless, and more. ContainerJournal.com has the largest selection of container-related news, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.containerjournal.com to learn more. ContainerJournal.com is operated by MediaOps Inc., the team behind DevOps.com, Digital Anarchist, SecurityBoulevard.com, DevOps Connect, and DevOpsDozen.com.
You know, one of the recent developments that have really caught on within the world of DevOps is this feature flags capability. I first became aware of it when CloudBeast had announced an acquisition in the space probably over a year ago. One of the leaders in the feature flag space, though, is a company called LaunchDarkly. And I had a chance to catch up with their CEO founder, Edith Harbaugh. Edith is, new breed entrepreneur CEO, comes with a great background, worked her way up, and really, has a really good grip on her company, on the space, on what their mission is and where they play. And it was actually nice speaking to Edith. I found it quite refreshing. I think you will too. And if you're interested in feature flags, this is LaunchDarkly is a great company to go check out. But B, this is a good interview to jump in on it. So let's now go over to our interview with Edith Harbaugh of LaunchDarkly.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us for this next segment here on TechStrong TV. I'm really happy to be joined today by Edith Harbaugh. Edith Harbaugh is a CEO of LaunchDarkly. And if you haven't heard the name of that company, and don't know what they do, Edith is going to tell you about it, and you're going to know after this segment. Hey, Edith, welcome to TechStrong TV.
Hi, nice to be here.
Nice to have you here. So, first of all, Edith, our audience doesn't know, but you've done pretty good for a woman in tech, as they say, right? Not that, and I want us to get to the point where who cares whether you're a woman or a man in tech, right? You've done pretty darn good, CEO of a company, but also, we should acknowledge a role model for people to aspire to, right? And you're blazing a path here for people. So congratulations and thank you. Now that I've put all that pressure on you about your background, talk to us a little bit about LaunchDarkly and how you came to be here today.
Well, first, I'm really proud of the team and what we've together created. So LaunchDarkly is a feature management platform. Our mission and vision is that software powers the world. We empower all teams to deliver and control that software. So let me break down a little bit what that means. We have 1,000+ customers all over the world, ranging from huge giants like Atlassian, Intuit, IBM, to much smaller companies who all use us to provide a better experience to their own users.
Fantastic. And Edith, talk to us about your own personal background, from a work related aspect. How did you get to here today?
Yeah, so I got an engineering degree from Harvey Mudd College, and I worked in software development as first in engineering and then as a product manager. And I kept seeing the same problems over and over again with releases that would go poorly and then cause a lot of angst. And I say angst because it sounds really simple, like a release went poorly, but a bad software release can have huge, huge consequences. People can not be able to access their bank account. People can not be able to file their tax return. People cannot be able to get the medical care they need. So we started Launch Darkly as a way of helping people solve these problems.
Fantastic. And I mean, the problems you highlighted are sort of taking it down to the consumer level even. But you as a, and I've unfortunately been on the other end of this as an executive, Edith. You put out a release that bricks something, right? And man, you want to talk about, stuff hitting the fan. It hits the fan really quick, especially if you haven't put like a decent rollback, right? Procedure in place where you can quickly kind of hit the undo button.
Yeah.
Right. But even until you do, I mean, it's every second that bad release is out there, angst is a good word for it. I mean, it's heartburn.
Well, and even more than angst, I was on the other side also of those bad releases. Mm-hmm. When you're stressed, your mind starts making hormones that actually are putting you into fight or flight mode. Like, I need to react right now. And this is just a psychology thing. And sometimes when you're stressed like that, you make even worse decisions.
This is also true. You're 100% right. So
what was your experience with the bad release?
We fired a lot of engineers that in retrospect I shouldn't have done, but I was just so upset because, so this is pre-DevOps, this is going back. And, we do 2 releases a year, and you roll out vulnerability management, intrusion detection, this cyber stuff. And you put out this new release that all of your big customers have been waiting on because you promised them, and it's already late, right? And then you promise them this, and stuff just breaks, right? And you've got an inline intrusion detection system that goes down, and they don't call it inline for nothing, right? So not only you took down your customers' networks because it's inline, and so that becomes like boom, a roadblock, and man, we lost some big customers quickly. And they just ripped our stuff out.
Yeah. Right?
They had to. And we wound up making a change of the project lead pretty quickly as well. Like the next day we changed, we moved on from the lead developer on the project product, and a bunch of people who, well, once he left, a bunch of people under him kind of left too. It was traumatic, to say the least. I mean, it really. We shortly thereafter started selling NAC, network access control, because it wasn't in line, but it really did. It forced us to look at the whole. What the heck are we doing, right? And how didn't we test this? How didn't we know this was a potential problem here? And I haven't thought about that in a long time, Edith. I don't even want to think about it.
Well, I think it is interesting. Like, so when you were talking about it, I could I broke it down into my head into different things that DevOps is trying to solve. You were only doing 2 releases a year, so each release got more and more important. Because you're trying to shove more features into each release, and then the surface area just becomes harder and harder and harder to test. And what you said also is it was already late. Which then also forces more features in, because the product manager says, hey, this big trade show is coming out. We got to put 2 more features in because we're late, so we need to have more to announce. Just like this spiral of
Oh no, it's crazy. And you didn't have as much automated testing then,
Yeah.
right? And to go out and do like unit testing or load testing, right? You know, virtualization was already possible, but it was hard. It was hard to do real good load testing and real good unit testing and stuff like that.
And that's the other part that I was about to get to. It is impossible to test everything until it's in production.
Yep.
Like
That's true.
what I found over and over as an engineer is that, of course, you want to do unit tests. Of course, you want to do everything you can internally. But when you put stuff out into the real world, that's when you find the real issues. And it's not possible to replicate some of those things that you'll see out there. You know?
Yes, but you know what? All of that is 100% true. But when you're sitting in that executive suite and you've got your biggest customers yelling and telling you they just tore your stuff out, you want to talk about fight or flight? I'll tell you about fight or flight, man. You want to just crawl under your desk and crawl up into a fetal position. It's crazy, but anyway.
Well,
go ahead.
That's what Launch Darkly is trying to fix.
Right.
I mean,
So tell us how you guys fix it. You gave me a good, in the beginning there, you sort of gave us that high end or that high level marketing talk about Launch Darkly's mission. But now let's dig in, Edith. What exactly do you guys do?
Yeah. Well, thank you first for acknowledging our great marketing statement.
Okay. I'm sorry. I call them as I see them.
You know, I don't write code anymore, but you know, I've been in there for those bad releases. So we said, how can we make life better for the engineers and for the customers? Like that was a bad experience all around. So there's a technique called feature flagging or feature toggling.
Familiar.
Yeah, I'll briefly describe it. You know, it was really popularized by Martin Fowler of this idea of having toggles or switches in your code where you could turn stuff on and off after deployment. And this sounds really basic. You know, people are like, well, that's just an if statement. But it is incredibly powerful for the situations we just talked about. Like, so to go back to your release, if stuff was going bad immediately after it went out, we provide people with a simple kill switch where they can turn off paths without having to do a redeploy. And that's really powerful. Like if you're,
sure.
You know, Atlassian talks about mean time to remediation. You know, even if you're a pretty good DevOps shop, it probably takes you about 15 minutes to spin up a new release. Maybe 5 if you're like tight. But what you really want is a kill switch where you can just turn it off in about a second or a microsecond sometimes. And that's the power that we give people. And then to go back to your example, then you could do the postmortem of, well, okay, what went wrong? How do we fix it? But the immediate pain is just stopped. You know, you could have.
Right. Well, the bleeding. You stop the bleeding, right?
Yeah. You stop the bleeding immediately, so you can say, okay, there's something that's not great about this release. Let's stop it. The alternative traditional technique was to do a classic rollback. You know, of like, hey, let's get the last version.
Right.
That's sometimes really hard or not impossible to do. You know, if you've done some database migrations also or changed the schema, it's not as simple as just roll back.
Yeah.
I mean,
Absolutely. Well, don't forget, when we did this, we had sold appliances to people, and they had downloaded, in essence, a patch. It was running a LAMP stack, and they, you know, had downloaded an update. Not so much to the LAMP stack, to the app itself, but you know, it was so to go roll it back. We had to get on the phone and walk them through a rollback. It wasn't. Yeah, okay. You feel my pain. I can tell. But you know, the interesting thing about feature flags is, yes, you could have that one big flag maybe that kind of stops the update or whatever. But you don't have to. From what I know this much about feature flags. Let me just say, nothing compared to you. But you have multiple feature flags for different features within the release, so you can troubleshoot. You don't have to roll the whole thing back. You don't have to stop the whole thing. There are for each flag, you can kind of set the on-off switch, which really gives you granular control.
Yeah, I mean, it's very powerful. So again, to talk about your release is a good case study. If say there was actually
you're just dragging me through the mud today. Go ahead. No, it's all good. Yeah, go ahead.
Now, if say you had 4 critical security patches that absolutely needed to go out of that release, and there's one thing that's just troublesome and like maybe it's a callback that's taking too long, it's killing the entire release, you could just turn off that one feature that's doing poorly.
Right.
And the other thing that also buys you is time. The situation, I'll stop talking about your release. It's very common when you're trying to fix a bad release that you often might make more mistakes.
Yes.
You were trying to compress, I'll go back, sorry. You're trying to compress.
No, you can go back. It was a long time ago. That company was sold. I didn't make a dime on it. It's okay.
You're trying to compress 6 months of work and testing into like 2 hours of we need to fix this all and fix it quickly. And that can sometimes stomp over a lot of other stuff and make the problem even worse.
Yeah, it really does. Because it goes back to something that you said early on, Edith, is when you're making decisions, in the situation room, in the crisis room, or whatever you want your war room, which was a popular thing, right? The war room. Sometimes you're not thinking clearly because you are under the gun, and you make decisions that perhaps you wouldn't have made if you had a chance to. All right, let me stop the bleeding here right now and just breathe and figure out what's the right thing to do here. And so your decision-making process is so much better. Quite frankly, I find that even in running things here at Media Ops, a lot of times I'll knee-jerk react, but before I hit send, or before I do something, I'll actually say, wait a second, let me step back and think about it, so I'm just not reacting, right? And I think feature flags gives us that thing. But let's talk from the developer point of view and the process point of view. How do we put those feature flags in, Edith? How do we, where to set them, and at what point in the software development lifecycle do we do that?
Yeah, well, let me talk a little bit more about how developers use them. There's the most immediate kill switch, and then there's also a secondary very powerful use case of testing in production, where you can have this feature, and instead of having these, big bang out to everybody releases, you can selectively push them to a couple people. So this is also very useful. We talked earlier about, you had people who were pulling out the code because they were so pissed off. You can make rings of people and say, hey, I want our early adopters to opt in and get this. And also, I want to block some people from getting it until it's actually rock solid and been in production for a couple months, maybe. So how developers usually use feature flags is they think about their code. If you're using LaunchDarkly, then we have SDKs for all the major languages, and you wrap your code with us.
Fantastic. All right, we've spent the bulk of our time talking about this. I don't think we've done right by LaunchDarkly. For people who want to get more information about LaunchDarkly, it's launchdarkly.com. That's LaunchDarkly.com, correct?
That's right. And my co-founder actually wrote a book called Effective Feature Management, and we published it with O'Reilly.
And so the book, too, is out there. Can you get to the book off the LaunchDarkly website?
Yes, absolutely.
Very cool. And then in terms of how do you offer this? Is there an open source free version or some sort of trial, or how would people be able to kind of get this in their hands and start using it?
Yeah, it only takes about 10 minutes to start using us. We have a 30-day free trial, so as easy as just going to our website and getting going. Again, we have SDKs for all the major languages: Java, Java, .NET, anything you could think of, even Roku these days, we have a SDK for.
Got it. All right. Excellent. Edith, I want to thank you for joining us today. We're probably coming up on time. So launch darkly, feature flags. Feature flags, actually, here on DevOps.com, we've been writing about feature flags for a while now. It's something I think our audience, I don't know if we're unique, but our audience has been kind of clued into for a while, and I think we see just how powerful a force it could be, in helping.
I 100% agree. And again, you don't have to use Launch Darkly to use feature flags. Like many people use a homegrown platform they've built themselves. We just make it much easier to do it.
Well, but that's always the sign of a maturing segment or a maturing technology. It used to always be so, well, my biggest competitor is a spreadsheet, right?
Yeah.
How many times have you heard that in your career? And, and so there comes a point where the home-brewed stuff is great, but we're not doing microbrews, right? If you want to go scalable enterprise, with responsibility and that, there comes a point where you do have to move up. Feature flags are a powerful tool in the arsenal here, right?
Yeah.
And so you want to make sure you've got the right solution for it. So keep doing what you're doing, Edith. It's great stuff.
Thanks.
All righty. Very good. Thank you. Edith Harbaugh, CEO, Launch Darkly here on TechStrong TV. Go check it out. If you haven't heard about feature flags or you're not using them, you should really dig in on that too. This is Alan Schimmel. We'll be right back with our next guest.
I got the burgers. I went to Bun Barn, Beef Patty Palace, Tomato Town.
Oh, thanks for getting all this, honey.
No problem. Getting all of it just took about 2 hours.
I just wish there was an easier way to get all your burger fixings from one place,
Oh.
Dad, you didn't go to Mayo King?
You know our car doesn't fit in their drive-thru. I went to Mustard Chef.
I hate this burger.
He also went to ketchup.
When you're building something using components that don't work together easily, things could get ugly, fast. You wouldn't live like this, so don't make your DevOps team live like this.
This lack of burger cohesion is hard on all of us, Cheryl.
GitLab is the only single application for the entire DevOps lifecycle.
Hey, so as I mentioned at the top of the show, our something old for today's show is not that old. It's only from last week. But it's the fourth of the 4 keynotes we had at TechStrong.com. And, I think it's one of the best ones, as is normal for Liz Rice. This is Liz Rice, a board member at CNCF and Aqua Security, and her presentation was Container Images, Small is Beautiful. Why keeping your container images small is a good idea. So let's now go back to TechStrong with Liz Rice for Container Images, Small is Beautiful.
Hi, my name's Liz Rice. I look after open source engineering at Aqua Security, and Aqua Security helps enterprises. We have products to help enterprises with securing their cloud native deployments. I'm also involved with the CNCF. I chair the technical oversight committee of the CNCF. And so I'm pretty embedded in the world of cloud native and containers. And today I wanted to talk about container images, and in particular, why small container images are a really good thing. If we're going to talk about why small container images are good, it's a good idea if we dive into what we find inside a container image in the first place. Then we can talk about why small images are better and how you can go about making your images smaller than perhaps they are today. So, what's inside a container image? I'm going to guess that most of you have some familiarity with using tools like Docker to run containers. So you're used to the idea of Docker pull to get hold of an image that you can then run. Inside that container image, there's basically two sets of information. There's a root file system and some configuration information. When you run a container based on that container image, the root file system populates the file system that you can see from inside the container. So if you're running a container and you look in root using something like ls, you'd see the set of directories and files that came from that container image root file system. And then the configuration information is information about how that container should run. So things like whether there were any resource limits set up using cgroups. Maybe there are some environment variables that are defined. And that information is all held in the configuration part of the container image. Now, you're used to the idea of doing Docker pull and maybe Docker inspect that you can use to see information about a container image, but it's pretty hard to actually get inside the contents of a container image. So I'm going to use some tools to take a Docker image and convert it into OCI format. OCI is the Open Containers Initiative, and it standardizes these formats for container images. So I'm going to use a tool called Scopio to take a Docker image and convert it into what's called the distribution format for the OCI. That format is what a component like Containerd would get from an OCI compliant registry. That format is still compressed and relatively opaque. So I'm going to use another tool called Umochi to unpack that image into what's called a runtime bundle. And it's the runtime bundle that a tool like runc would use to actually instantiate a container. So let's have a look at some OCI images. Okay, so I'm going to start by using Scopio to copy. I'm going to use the Ubuntu image as a pretty familiar image that we may all have used before. And I'm copying that into OCI format, and I want it to live in a directory called Ubuntu, and I'm going to give it the tag latest. So that's just going to get hold of that image from the Docker registry. It's copying those blobs. And now if I look inside the Ubuntu directory, I've got a subdirectory called blobs. Inside that, there's just one directory called SHA-256. And inside there, I have some files. Let's just take a look at the file type of one of those. As an example, I'll use that first one. And we can see that it's gzip compressed data. This is these sort of layers of the file system in compressed format. So still pretty hard for us to see exactly what's inside. But now I can use Umochi to unpack that image. So I'm going to take the Ubuntu image, which is tagged latest, and I'm going to convert that into a runtime bundle, and I'm going to call that Ubuntu bundle. And if I now look inside the Ubuntu bundle that we've just created, we can see some config information and a root file system. And let's look inside that root file system, and we can see that set of directories, just what you would expect to see if you were running an Ubuntu VM. It would look exactly like that set of directories. We can also take a quick look at the config information. And you can see things like the environment variables and the capabilities that are going to be granted to this container. This is all that configuration information about how to run this container. So let's use runc to actually instantiate this container. So I'm going to go into that directory and I'll use runc to run this this container, and I could run, let's say, bash. Now I'm inside a container. We can kind of see that the prompt has changed. I can confirm that it is a container by looking at the running processes. I'm not seeing anything across the whole virtual machine. I'm just seeing these limited set of processes from my container. And if I list what's in the root directory, it's exactly what we saw earlier in that root file system. So that's how we get the root file system that's visible from inside the container. Okay. So switch back to my slides. So the size of the image that we retrieve from Docker or in a OCI format is largely determined by the contents of that root file system. The more files there are inside that root file system, the bigger the image is inevitably going to be. Taking a few examples, that Ubuntu image that we just used is around 74 megabytes. That's quite a substantial image. I'm sure many of you will have come across the Alpine Linux distribution, which is designed to be smaller. It's actually less than 10% the size of Ubuntu. And if we use those as base images for applications, it makes a real difference to the size of those application container images. Nginx, based on Debian, is like 127 megabytes. The version based on Alpine is around a fifth of the size. So that can make a real difference to what the size of the image that we need to move around. So why do I care? What's so good about having small images? One really important aspect of this is performance. We need to pull that image from a registry to the machine where it's going to run. That involves network transfer. The laws of physics determine that it will take a finite amount of time to move data from the registry to where it's going to run, and it will take longer if the image is large. Bear in mind that you might have to do that over and over again. If you've got a cluster of machines that you're running containers on, that image could be required on any one of those nodes, perhaps all of those nodes, and that's data transfer every time you need to pull that image. While we're on the topic of pulling images, in Kubernetes, it's a good policy to use image pull policy set to always, and that ensures that you always have the latest version, whatever node you're running on. So the size of an image really makes a huge difference to the performance, the speed with which we can get that image onto the machine it's needed on. But there's also a security implication for the size of an image has implications on security. It's basically two possibilities for insecure container images. One possibility is that there's something insecure about the configuration. Now, I'm actually going to not really talk about that today because all that configuration information can be overridden at runtime. So anything that you find insecure about the configuration of an image, you can deal with by overriding it at runtime. The other possible security flaw in a container image is that perhaps it contains some insecurities within the files in that root file system. In particular, are there any known exploitable vulnerabilities? typically we find these vulnerabilities using a vulnerability scanner for container images. So one scanner is Trivy that my team actually build and maintain. There are other scanners available. And what they're really all doing is looking at the packages installed into the file system of a container image and comparing it against a database of known vulnerabilities. Some of these vulnerabilities are really famous. Sometimes they get logos, they get names like Shell Shock and Heartbleed. And if you're running with a critical vulnerability like that, it is kind of an open door for an attacker. So you really want to make sure you're not running with vulnerabilities. Now, it's kind of a statistical truism that the less code you have, the less complex it is, and therefore the less likely it is to have vulnerabilities, whether they're known or not known yet. It also sort of stands to reason that the more packages you have installed in an image, the more likely it is that one of those packages has a known vulnerability. So also bear in mind that vulnerabilities get found, in existing code. They can be found in code that was written a decade ago. So you should be scanning your images on a regular basis to find these vulnerabilities. And the smaller the image is, the fewer packages it contains, the less code it contains, the less the likelihood is that it includes some of these vulnerabilities. So statistically speaking, the smaller your image is, the less likely it is to have known vulnerabilities or even vulnerabilities that haven't been uncovered yet. So smaller images are better from a security point of view, and they're better from a performance point of view because of the speed of transferring those images. What kind of things do you perhaps have in your container images today that maybe you don't really need to be there? So one thing that we maybe don't see so often but could be in container images today is an SSH server. There's no reason to have an SSH server on a container or in a container image. You can always get into container using tools like Docker exec or kubectl exec. So there's no particular reason to have SSH running inside a container. I would actually advise not to be execing into your containers on anything other than a very unusual basis. Really, you should be treating your containers as immutable. If you need to change something about a container, you should rebuild the image and redeploy new versions of those containers. So treat your containers as immutable. Don't be execing into them and changing the contents of those running containers. Another thing that you probably don't need inside your containers is logging specific code. Containers are designed to take output that's written to standard out or standard err and write that to system-wide logging. So you don't need logging daemons running inside containers. Cron is another example of something you probably don't need. You may very well have jobs that you want to run on a scheduled basis that are containerized, but the cron aspect of that doesn't need to be inside the container. You can use your orchestrator to schedule the jobs and have them just run as a short running job at the appropriate schedule. And another thing that you maybe don't need inside a container is a package manager. I've just said that we should be treating our containers as immutable. So why would you want to be adding and removing packages inside those containers? Well, it can be very useful to be able to add packages at build time. I hope you're not doing it at runtime. So maybe we need a packager inside the container during that build step. Some other things to consider that maybe we don't need inside containers. How about shells? a shell can be a hugely useful tool for an attacker that gets into your container. So it might be nice to remove shells from container images so that attackers can't take advantage of them. But depending on your application, you might need a shell. It's totally legitimate to have shell scripts running inside containers. So removing the shell might be a step too far, depending on your application. If you do remove a shell from a container image, bear in mind that you need to define the entry point in the command in the non-shell format. Otherwise, you would have a dependency on that shell. And then how about the packages that are installed into container images? You really want to make sure that you only have the packages that your application really needs. Some examples of packages that you maybe don't need and that maybe should ring an alarm bell. I would question why you need curl in a container image if you're going to treat that container as immutable. Why would you be downloading code using curl? SSH. Again, no real reason to be SSHing either to or from a container in most circumstances. And then finally, how about executable utilities? Do you really need your container to be able to list its own contents or change the permissions inside a running container? Maybe you don't really need that code at all for your application. That said, if you're using a container image based on Alpine, Alpine is itself based on BusyBox, and BusyBox has essentially just one executable symbolically linked for all of these, the binaries like ls that exist in /bin. Okay, so we've seen a whole set of things that probably don't need to exist in your container images or might not need to exist in your images depending on your application. Seems like it might be pretty painful to actually go through all your container images and remove these different items sort of individually. So what's a more practical way of making images smaller? One option is a tool called Docker Slim, and this is, it inspects your image, removes the unused files that it figures out aren't really needed in that image, and creates a smaller, slim version of that image. However, Docker Slim removes package information, and the package information is really what the vulnerability scanner needs to see what packages are installed and therefore whether or not those packages have vulnerabilities. So let's take a look at Docker Slim in action. So I need to exit out of that container I was running before and go back to the previous directory. So I can run Docker Slim in interactive mode, and I'm going to build based on targets. Let's take Nginx. We'll take the latest version of Nginx, and we will create a slim version of Nginx. And this will just take a few seconds to investigate what's inside Nginx and figure out what files and packages can be removed. Okay, and once that's finished, I can exit. And now if I do, I list the Nginx images, we can see that that slim version that I've just created is dramatically smaller even than the Alpine-based version of Nginx. So it's kind of half the size. So that seems pretty pretty good, pretty encouraging. Now, let me show you what I meant about removing the package information. So if I run the original version of Nginx, I'll just run Nginx, and I'm going to list the packages that are installed. So it has the APT package manager inside that image, and we can see there's dozens of packages that APT finds inside that original pre-slimmed version of Nginx. If I try to do the same thing on the slim version, it's not going to work because that APT package manager is one of the things that Docker Slim recognized wasn't needed to run Nginx, so it's been removed. That doesn't necessarily mean that all the packages have been removed, just that the package manager has been removed. Now, the package information exists inside varlib package. So if I go to the original one and I list what's inside there, varlib package, we can see some directories, there's information there like status. This is the information that vulnerability scanners will use to determine which packages are contained inside the image and therefore whether or not they're vulnerable or not. I can't just list what's inside the slim version. Let's just try it. I can't do it because that executable ls is one of the things that Docker Slim has removed. But what I could do is do what we did earlier, use Scopio and Emoji to convert that Nginx Slim image into OCI format and then into the runtime bundle, and then we can look at the file system. And I actually already did this. So I have an Nginx Slim bundle, and inside that we'd find a root file system. There is a var directory, but there's no var lib. There's only var cache, var log, and var run. So this package information has been removed from the image. And because of that, a vulnerability scanner wouldn't be able to determine whether or not this slimmed down image has any known vulnerabilities or not. All right. Another option for small images is distroless. This is a project by Google to create a set of minimal images for different languages. They take Debian images, they remove unnecessary binaries, they remove the package manager. They don't remove packages, and also they don't remove all of those varlib package information. So because it leaves that information in place, distroless images can be scanned by at least certain vulnerability scanners. And what the distroless project recommend is using these distroless versions of images as the final stage in a multi-stage build. So I've taken this example Docker file straight from the distroless project. It's showing an example of building a Java application. So the first 5 lines of this Docker file use the Java toolchain to build that application. And then the last few lines start from that distroless image, the base image for Java, copies the application into this distroless image. And so we end up with a distroless image and just the application and what it needs in order to run. We don't need the whole build toolchain. And there's examples of distroless for a variety of different languages. Again, we can take a look at the contents of a distroless image. So I have also used Scopio and Emoji to unpack a distroless image. So let's have a look at inside that. This is the Java bundle. If I look inside the root file system here, we can actually see there is varlib package information. It's actually all contained inside this status D information. This is sufficient for, certainly Trivy can use this information to determine which packages are installed inside this information. So you can build these small images based on distroless without sacrificing the ability to scan for vulnerabilities. Now, the most extreme small image that we can use is the Scratch image. Scratch is kind of a base image. It's not really even a base image. It's more a reserved word in Docker representing an empty image with nothing. Imagine that root file system with no files, no directories, nothing. And then you can use this in Docker files in the from command. So you can start with from scratch and add in whatever files your application container is going to need. My example there is imagining having a single executable called hello and just copying that single file into the container image. If you don't need any packages, you can't have any known package vulnerabilities. They can't exist if there are no packages. So using the Scratch container as a basis can be a really effective way of avoiding any of these known package vulnerabilities, particularly if you're using a language that compiles to standalone executables. So if you're using languages like Go or C, Scratch could be a really great option. One gotcha is that if you're using secure connections, TLS connections, sometimes known as SSL connections, your binary might need to be able to verify certificates with the component that it's setting up connections with. And in order to verify certificates, it will need certificate authority information. So you would need to add the certificate authority files into your Scratch-based image. That is one thing that people do sometimes get caught out by. But Scratch can be a hugely valuable way of getting tiny images. You might want to consider using it in a multi-stage build where you have a first stage similar to what we saw with distroless that uses the language toolchain in that first build step, and then has a final stage that starts from scratch and copies the executable and any other dependencies, any other necessary files into the Scratch or into an image based on Scratch, starting from nothing. So Scratch is probably the ultimate way of making the smallest possible container image for your application. But size isn't the only thing you should consider. There are other things you should take into account. In particular, you don't want to be going for the smallest possible container image at the cost of making it hard for developers to use those images. You want to know that if you're using a small base image, that it is well maintained. And if it's got any packages at all, you want to make sure that those packages don't have vulnerabilities. So do bear in mind that that base image contains code and that code can be vulnerable. You need to be able to scan that base image. So my recommendation is there isn't just one possible route for building small container images. Your best options depend quite significantly on your application language. For binary languages or compiled languages that compile into standalone binaries, Scratch could be a good option. You may want to look at other smaller base images like distroless, possibly like Alpine, as the starting point for other interpreted languages. it is probably a good idea to try to find images that aren't based on the entire full distribution. For example, if you take a desktop distribution, there's going to be a whole lot of things that your container doesn't need, and that's wasteful. So start from small and appropriate base images for your application and for your language. Consider using multi-stage builds to avoid having those sort of tool chain requirements in the final container. And do make sure that whatever base image you're using, make sure that your vulnerability scanner supports it, knows how to interpret the package information inside it, and can let you know about any significant vulnerabilities in any packages. So I hope that's given you some insight into container images and their contents, and how to make small but relatively secure. I'm never going to say they are completely secure, because new vulnerabilities get discovered all the time. But hopefully those are helpful tips for making smaller, usable, pragmatic images. If you want to get more information about best practices for building secure container images, there is additional information on that in my book, which recently came out, published by O'Reilly, about container security. If you go to containersecurity.tech, from there you will find a link to the Aqua Security site, where Aqua have sponsored the book, and you can get a free electronic copy for the price of your contact details. So yeah, do download the book, and if you want to dive into more information about building secure container images and other aspects of container security. Thank you very much.
SecurityBoulevard.com is the leading resource for news, analysis, and education on challenges facing the cybersecurity industry. SecurityBoulevard.com covers all aspects of cybersecurity, including data security, DevSecOps, cloud security, application security, network security, security threats, and more. SecurityBoulevard.com has the largest selection of security content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.securityboulevard.com to learn more. SecurityBoulevard.com, home of Security Bloggers Network.
Hey everyone. Okay, it's time now for our news section on TechStrong TV. As usual, a bit of a roundup of the headlines on all three news sites that we run here at MediaOps, DevOps.com, Container Journal, Security Boulevard. And also, as usual, this is not an exhaustive list of what's on the sites today. Really, you should go check them out for yourselves and see what's there. But let me just start it off with some Container Journal news. Container technology is moving to continuous flow. And I think that was always the idea, right? Immutable infrastructure and everything else that containers enable should have you have this kind of continuous flow of updating and deployment. Also on Container Journal, Snap brings ADC to Kubernetes. The folks at Snap are making a lot of headlines recently, and this is their latest, so check that out. Over on DevOps.com, with the move to work from home, enterprise risk and careers are changing, right? The whole enterprise risk, what do we are willing to bear and what risks are is changing a bit. We take a good look at that in this article. And then also we have cloud and DevOps, CI/CD, and market analysis, right? CI/CD is becoming the dominant methodology for deploying cloud applications, and a good market analysis there. Also, just a couple of other headlines on DevOps.com. Hasura simplifies data accessing using GraphQL API. And of course, we've been talking a little bit about GraphQL recently and how popular it is. We did a good interview here on TechStrong TV about that a couple weeks ago. And then also MongoDB allies with Storage Labs, right? Mongo's still a leader in NoSQL databases. And then over on Security Boulevard, protecting health data privacies as employees return to work. So we are returning to work, but of course everyone wants to know, is anyone in the office, have they tested positive for COVID? Did they have antibodies? My God, you're coughing, go home. Should we be taking temperature and sharing that information with everyone? So this is a privacy issue I think that's going to pop up. And it's a good article on that. And then also we have another one, Access Governance helps ensure network security compliance. And, you know, really, look, governance is the gatekeeper, if you will, for compliance. If you don't know what the governance is, how the heck can you be compliant against it? So anyway, take a look at those articles. As usual, just some headlines here for you. I hope you enjoy them. Hope you enjoy the articles. Go check out. There's so much more on all three sites, though. For now, though, it's that time where we head on over to our managing editor, Charlene O'Hanlon, who has a great interview lined up for us today. Charlene, take it away.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to TechStrong TV. I am Charlene O'Hanlon, Managing Editor at Media Ops. I'm here now with John Kim, who is the CEO of a company called Sendbird. Hi, John. How are you? Thanks for joining me today.
Yeah, I'm really excited to be here.
Great. So tell me a little bit about Sendbird.
Yeah, Sendbird, we are the world's #1 chat API. We power messaging behind the scene across a lot of the food delivery apps, telemedicine, telehealth, a lot of dating apps around the world. So basically, as a chat API, we power about 100 million people who have a conversation on our platform every month. And we're headquartered here in San Mateo. We have 200 people across the company that are all just focusing and making sure that we power the best messaging experience around the world.
Excellent. Well, I know that, communication in general has been super, super important, especially, in light of the pandemic and the fact that organizations are now completely distributed. Their employees are all working from home or working remotely. So, it kind of brings to mind a couple questions about, just communications in general. I mean, what areas are you seeing an increase in the use of these kind of communication technologies and platforms? I mean, obviously businesses are using them, such as like Zoom, what we're using right now, but are there other areas that maybe are seeing an uptick in the use of these platforms that previously, maybe might not have even been on your radar?
Yeah, I think we kind of look at ourselves almost like an index fund for digital communication. So we've seen a lot of almost like a polarization across different industries. Where obviously the folks in like the travel and hospitality industry, there you have seen a very dramatic shift or decrease in the overall user base. But what we've also seen a lot is the uptick in the digital communication space in general, like online communities. We're seeing a lot of increase just all across the board. Interest groups, dating apps even, and they're also doing video dating nowadays. Mm-hmm. I think obviously healthcare has been a tremendous increase in overall just usage, and I think the overall industry adapted really well to this dramatic shift, especially in the time of need. And I think food delivery apps, obviously I've ordered food delivery very often these days, and we've seen dramatic increase on those front as well. And also like groceries. So probably the things that people are already kind of using mm-hmm. after this pandemic happened with shelter in place, I think those industries have benefited a lot for sure.
All right, great. So do you think that this is kind of the new normal now? I mean, obviously we've had these platforms for a while, and to your point, these grocery store apps and food delivery services and things like that. But, I think for many people, they may not have been kind of top of mind or the primary form of communication for everyday tasks and business or otherwise. But now that they have quite literally become the primary mode of communication for a lot of folks. Do you think that now we've kind of like crossed the threshold, if you will, and most people are going to kind of continue with this method of communication, even beyond this pandemic, and after things kind of quote unquote get back to normal?
Yeah, I think kind of just visually thinking, I think the situation is like like this water balloon. If you press one end, the pressure builds up in the other end where there's like a increase in certain dimensions. So I think this pandemic situation is kind of that pressure. So portion is because of that virus that's going on. Once that pressure goes away, there will be obviously a return to our old normal days. Mm-hmm. Then there are also areas that are newly discovered areas where we think the digital communication actually increase the overall experience and the efficiency. Like telehealth, like we are realizing we don't really have to sit in the doctor's office waiting for the appointment, sitting there for 30-40 minutes to have a 15-minute conversation. Mm-hmm. Now we can actually do that over a push notification. Hey, you get a push notification, you punch in, and then you immediately jump on this video call with the doctor. That is a better experience for almost everyone involved. So I think part of the industry is unlocking these inefficiencies that were that existed before. And now this forcing function has really unlocked that kind of the newer world where the experience is better, is a lot more efficient. So I think those kind of usage pattern are definitely here to stay. Mm-hmm. And I think their overall, the habit formation of food delivery, we believe a lot of the customers are actually ordering food through these apps for the first time in their lives. Mm-hmm. So people who have not done this before are now thinking, oh, this is actually quite usable. I can order from my favorite restaurant without having to stand in line to pick up the food. This is actually a better experience for them. So some portion will definitely shift towards this new habit. But people will still go back to restaurants and just enjoy the experience as well. So once this pressure goes away, a portion will kind of swing back to the old experience, if not more severely, because we kind of saw that glimpse into the future in some of the countries that were able to, relatively well contain the virus. Mm-hmm. Like South Korea has done a relatively good job there. So we're already seeing a lot of population just out in the streets, going to restaurants, going back to their old normal. But a portion of them are still ordering more food through delivery apps as well.
Okay. All right, great. So now that we have kind of gotten to a particular comfort level with using a lot of these applications and these communication platforms, where do you see this technology headed? I mean, do you think that we'll actually have more technology features integrated into these platforms, or I don't know, something else altogether? I mean, what do you kind of foresee for the market there?
Yeah, I think high level, people inherently just have we always have this need to connect with other people, mm-hmm. whether it be digital or offline, analog world. And I think what kind of technology like ours are really enabling is really be able to provide that interactivity and connections in a digital world. And this kind of our mission too, is to build digital connections, build connections in a digital world. And before, a lot of these apps were staying in that kind of transactional way where you didn't really have this connection with the service provider. You're clicking menus and buttons and you probably got things you want, but there wasn't really a human connection element. But if you think about this so-called social distancing, social distancing doesn't really mean, emotional distancing. We still need that emotional connection, sure. and that interaction with other people. So I think these kind of technologies like ours can really bridge those gaps and enabling other businesses around the world to harness the power of human connection on their own businesses, which I do believe is a better experience.
Great. Well, I hope that we are moving in that direction, but I hope in the process we don't actually lose that human touch. But I think you're right. I think we're social animals, so we need to communicate however we can. So good stuff. Thanks, John. I really do appreciate your time, and I look forward to seeing what happens in the next generation of communications technology. It's going to be interesting.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me.
Great. Well. Thanks again. I do appreciate your time. So, all right, everybody, please stay tuned. We've got lots more TechStrong TV coming up, so stick around.
Disruption is occurring across every aspect of IT. Open source, cloud services, DevOps, and cloud-native software architectures are democratizing IT and radically transforming how business is done. The old ways of creating software and doing IT are being replaced with agile, flexible, faster, and cheaper methods, benefiting vendors and users alike. Accelerated Strategies Group is out to democratize access of industry expertise and knowledge. We use our expertise and experience to offer insightful, intelligent, useful information in a variety of formats relevant to the IT community: digital events, videos, reports, assessments, workshops, and implementation projects with tech vendors, IT organizations, and business leaders. We widely and openly share our work products, often for free. Analyst reports these days aren't worth more than a graph or chart that tells a story or illustrates a market trend. We work with developers, DevOps teams, cloud architects, security engineers, and transformation leaders most every day, creating and implementing transformational strategies and technologies. We're not just thinkers, we're also doers.
Thanks, Charlene. Great interview with John Kim. Now it's time for the Analyst Corner with Mitch. And let's head over to Mitchell Ashley, CEO, founder of Accelerated Strategies Group. Mitchell?
Well, we continue to live through a lot of changes, a lot of things happening both in society and business and our personal lives. There are a lot of models for examining disruptive situations, and there's things like assess, stabilize, move through. You see a number of models. I've talked about some of them in different talks. There's one that I like to use, this sort of a three-step process I'm going to share with you. Those three things are disruption, innovation, and acceleration. And when a disruption happens, and you've heard me say this before, great opportunities exist and come out of that, including there's, of course, pain that goes associated with it, sometimes very substantial difficulties and challenges. But through that disruption means that's a great time to re-examine things. So that time of disruption is really a time of, you may be taking some actions to stabilize things or react or be able to respond to what's happening in the moment. But also think about it as kind of like if you had a member of your team leave, you might re-examine what that position might be as you reimagined it to fill it with the next person that's going to be there. Maybe it's a different kind of position than it was when the last person occupied it. Same kind of thing with the disruption in the environment that we're working in, whether it's a process, a system, an approach to an application, a technology, a strategy. Things have changed. Things have been tossed up in the air. Sort of that deck of card analogy. I talked about this at TechStrong Con, the 52 pickup, right? When the cards are all thrown on the floor, the rules get reset. Sometimes they get rewritten completely. So that disruption then leads to a great opportunity for innovation. Now, innovation is a highly overrated, overused word, and of course, innovation is not necessarily my unique specialty, but part of just doing what I've done throughout my career has involved a lot of innovation, and oftentimes it's during these disruptive periods. Apple, for example, upped their investment after 9/11 from 5% to 8% of sales, and really ramped up their R&D that led to things like iPod and iTunes and eventually iPhones, et cetera. Some great things can happen out of that disruption. So think about this time is also then an opportunity for look or to create innovation in what you do. And then the third aspect is acceleration. So you may have created something, but it has to bring with it some momentum to the business, to the strategy, to the technologies that you're using, to the organization, whatever it might be, but really powering that through. And it can be some things that are very substantial. Maybe you're creating new services in new ways, new products that weren't relevant to prior to the disruption. We talked about contactless services and delivering different kinds of digital experiences, increasing our investment and ramping up our digital transformation, digital innovation, digital experiences. Those are all great times to really go through this process of disruption, innovation, acceleration. So kind of think of that as there are good times ahead or good things ahead when disruption is happening. There's an opportunity to really innovate, create, kind of rethink the rules, rewrite the rules, And then how do you use that, develop strategies to help you accelerate, bring business benefits to your business, to your employees, to your customers. And you can really make some hay with the innovations that you create. So use that model. See what you think, if that helps you think about how to plan for the future. At least gives you a structure to kind of work through some ideas. Wish you the best.
DevOps.com is the #1 online destination for DevOps education and community building. DevOps.com covers all aspects of DevOps, including DevOps best practices and tools, DevOps culture, DevSecOps, business impact, continuous testing, continuous delivery, and more. DevOps.com has the largest collection of original DevOps content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.devops.com to learn more. DevOps.com, where the world meets DevOps.
It's Mitch Ashley with the Accelerated Strategies Group. I'm joined by two of my colleagues, friends, people that we work together in many different ways. First is Bob Bresselman, who's an analyst with ASG also. Welcome, Bob. And also Don Lutz, who is a coworker, advisor, does some analyst work with the Accelerated Strategies Group, as well as other development projects. So guys, welcome.
Hi, how are you?
Hi, great to be here.
Good. I'm excited to talk with you both, because you're both super interesting guys to talk to normally, and getting us all together is even more fun. So we wanted to talk about Dapper, and it's emerged, getting a lot of interest, some excitement, some questions about it, what it is, how to use it, why do we have it, etc. And I think we're going to delve into some of those issues today. While it's not developer level stuff, I think it'll help all of us kind of understand different perspectives on why Dapper, why not Dapper, where we go with it. So Don, do you mind kind of giving us, this isn't a tutorial, but give enough of an explanation so people know what Dapper is.
Sure. It stands for Distributed Application Runtime. So it really came out of two gentlemen who worked in the Azure CTO office that were intrigued by the problem when you're starting to build asynchronous messaging, microservices, plugging to Kubernetes, service mesh. There's a lot of complexity to that problem. So if you could create a runtime framework that would make that simpler, so you could build your services, they could work with Python, Go, C#, JavaScript, and deal with things like discovering services, figuring out where your various data stores are and how to talk to them, plug in actors because you need the ability to deal with stateful microservices. It was to create kind of a super subset of all the features to do cloud native across the board. I mean, in a high level nutshell, that's it. There are a lot of details, but you can kind of view it as that. And it happens at a runtime level, not at a framework level.
That's what I was going to ask you, is like compare that to a framework, because it's not a framework if you're talking runtime.
No, I mean, it has elements. It requires Docker. So the whole idea is whether you run it locally or with Kubernetes, there's a pattern called a sidecar pattern, and you run the other pod and you talk to that, and that is where the Dapper stuff lives. So you can easily connect all those things, do open telemetry and all of those values. So you don't have the problem of frameworks.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Cool.
so just to help me understand a little bit more, Don, so is Dapper multi-cluster? I mean, can I run it across multiple Kubernetes clusters?
You can. There's some effort in it, but you can do it.
Right. So the bigger one is just, here's your cluster, and instead of having to, control it through a service mesh or something, we can just point Dapper to it, and our life gets easier. Is that an accurate assessment?
That's an accurate assessment. Originally, they called it Dapper with a K because it was, Kubernetes and reactive. So if you could deal with events and you could deal with Kubernetes, then you start playing into that whole choreography orchestration concept.
Okay, so I have another question. So you spend time with this, so I'm going to defer to your expertise always and forever. But what's the learning curve?
I thought it was relatively easy. I found some of the developers that I did it originally with had trouble just because it requires they have sort of some DevOps mindsets, thinking about, okay, where are things, how to discover my services, and they're like, oh, well, I could talk to Kafka. I said, or you could use what's in Dapper to talk to it. They kind of they have to think systemically. It requires you to think about distributed systems, which is why Dapper got written. Distributed systems sometimes are the bane of developers because you have to think about things like eventual consistency, all those kind of asynchronous concepts, which sometimes throw people for loops.
So is it fair to say it's a one ring to rule them all solution?
Conceptually, yes.
So it's a way of life.
It could be, but I don't want to say that's the way it is.
That's a pretty evil ring you're referring to there.
Let's go back here. So it's a one ring solution published or sponsored by Microsoft?
yeah, but it's because of their open source focus, it kind of has a different. I mean, they were trying to solve a real problem. They were concerned that. I mean, I know it sort of has that vibe, but it's you can go multiple ways. I kind of enjoy it because it creates a nice, abstraction around some things that are handy to have.
Such as
being able to talk to Redis versus Kafka, figuring out where resources are, building, traditionally when you build actors, I've built a lot of actors over the years. There's akka, there's so many different actor frameworks. And the problem is microservices are horrible at state because you have too many components. And if you have an actor, it's a single threaded thing. So then you really know how to do that. And you can build stateful things that don't cause other problems.
Right. So let me just elaborate for a minute so we're all on the same page here. When you say a microservice has trouble with state, can you give me an example?
Well, just if you get if you get your traditional microservice, even if it just talks to one database, you're actually putting that data in there, and if you ever shared it, anything, it causes a problem. And you have to make sure you have all those things. You have to have the immutability and the calls and all that. Where if you have an actor, it really is this single-threaded thing that controls all the access to the outbox, so you don't have all those problems. The lock happens in the actor, not at the lower level of the data.
Is that because the functions are broken across different microservices, so they aren't all kind of pulled together into one?
But it's truly because it's really just single-threaded. The whole idea of an actor is, it just spins in a loop. It's not Node, but the whole idea, it is the thing that controls that access. That's why, there's a whole bunch of different actor frameworks out there. But you have to integrate them in. It's not always the easiest thing to do.
Okay, so let's be a little concrete here, because this is an interesting discussion before we get to the more, what can we say, policy work. So can you give me an example of where Dapper is just a really good solution? Can you say, here's the problem, and here's how Dapper really addresses it? As concrete as you can in 30 seconds. There you go.
Okay, well, I found it really handy. At Faction, we used it because I thought it was super interesting to deal with the fact that you could have C# or Go or Python, build up those microservices, make all those connections, and handle that correctly. You could have the SDK for each system very well and handle it without having to kind of you can do that with microservices, but it gives you a lot more plumbing to make it work better.
Right. Okay. All right. Well, that's good. Okay.
I was trying to do 30 seconons, so I was trying to figure out.
Yeah, you did 30 seconds. Yeah. So I'm just imagining. Let's go, but let's get a little more concrete. So let's say I have a really a microservice-oriented application, and let's say it's really simple. It just creates. I have one service that does nothing but emit fortune cookie strings. Right, here's a fortune. Right, be kind to your dog and all that stuff. And then I have another microservice that can take that fortune, and it can schedule it to be emitted to at a given period. That's a second microservice. And then I have a third microservice that can pick up, let's say, a message or through an HTTP connection directly, and given a target, have the ability to send that fortune, right, be kind to your dog, to a given target. How does Dapper adapt, or how does Dapper encapsulate all of those microservices into a single, not context, but a single organization?
Yeah, it would, you could put it in a pod, so to speak.
Right.
You'd build it in your pod, and you'd actually, Dapper enables both gRPC and HTTP. So you create your pod, and you could actually use the pub sub for the fortune cookie part. You then could use all the service discovery stuff so they all could find each other without much complexity. And then you could figure out the right way to scale it there in a simpler way.
Right. Because under Kubernetes, what we'd have to do is we'd have to create a service and do all that service discovery orchestration, right, in the in the service manifests, right? and Dapper does away with that?
It handles it in the framework. It does it very, very well.
Okay.
You know, you're kind of picking your poison. Do you want to do it all by hand, or you want to default it to a runtime framework that might not give you the granularity that you might want? So there are trade-offs there.
Right. But it sounds like it's a good solution then for, again, it's almost like Service Mesh Lite. I don't need to go deep into the weeds to do a whole boatload of configuration. I can put my services out there as in Kubernetes as each service A goes to pod A, service B goes to pod B, service C goes to pod C, and I can rely upon Dapper to handle the orchestration interaction between them. Is that accurate?
Correct. That's accurate, because I could say, okay, let's add a new pub sub that sends it off to service 4 over here and add that in.
Right. So then as a developer, I can go back to the fundamentals of microservice development and programming is I should only be concerned with my context. I should never be concerned with anybody else's context.
Correct.
If I'm writing the fortune cookie, all I need is my fortune cookie is my world. And as long as I can make sure that my fortune cookie service meets the SLA I'm publishing, my world is cool. Is that
correct? Correct.
Okay, that sounds great. So now, so we have this thing now called Dapper, and it, Service Mesh Lite, and when we talk about learning curve, Lily, when you sat down from day one, when you sat down and you learned Dapper, spelled D-A-P-R, and to where you actually had to become functional with it, how much time did that really take?
A couple days. I kind of messed around because I was trying to figure out, I wanted to try a bunch of different things. I built something in Go, then I did something in C#, spun up some messaging, looked at the service discovery. Okay, let's see, let's map it to a local process. Okay, let's map it. One, you have to have Docker. So everybody has to, familiarity with Docker is like fundamental. If Docker is not in, you can't do it without Docker. So container concepts have to be inherent to the people doing it.
And do you have to use Docker, or can you use an alternative container?
Docker is the way it's done right now. That's the way that
it doesn't support Container-D or...
No, it's Docker right now because they picked that as a default thing. It doesn't mean that couldn't happen. There's a lot, it's a very active repository where people are open, adding things all the time.
Right, but it is right. So you are buying Docker.
You're buying Docker. They picked that.
Right. It's interesting because there is a movement now in the industry to move away from Docker. Mm-hmm. Right.
Right. So, there are other ones. You see the different ones that are popping out. And that could be driven by the fact that Docker tried to do the enterprise and they sold it to Mirantis and they had no idea.
Yeah.
What they were doing at that level, which caused a lot of consternation.
Right. So is this geeky enough for you yet, Mitch?
I'm enjoying it. It's like a tennis match. I'm just waiting for the ball to go out of bounds. You guys are doing great.
Right. So now, okay, so let's go. So we got to do the framework. So here's the reality. You're an expert developer. You have a boatload of experience. So 2 days in downtime might be, if we had to take, not an entry level, but a developer would say 2 years experience and is just getting used to Microsoft. It might take maybe a week and a half.
Yeah, I would think that's about accurate.
Okay, so good. So I'm a development manager, and some guy sends me an email, say, look, you got to look at this Dapper stuff. It's going to solve a boatload of problems. And immediately the guy says, what's it going to cost me to adopt this, given my staff, right? And so we're already there looking at a week and a half of just play time, and that's all right. I mean, we got to do that with anything. So, but the benefit is. What I'm hearing you say is the benefit is that we don't have to struggle with the complexities of something like Istio.
Yes.
Which is a significant service mesh technology, or Azure Service Mesh, or any of the...
Linkerd, you name it, they're all a puzzle in a lot of ways.
Terribly complex, right? And so the pro is Service Mesh Lite. It's polyglot, so I can write in Go, Node, Dino, if anybody ever decides to adopt Dino. Whatever. It'd be interesting if I could write to mainframe COBOL interfaces.
There was actually one of the guys, I should send the article, mapped it to COBOL. One of the guys who worked with the CTO at Microsoft did make it work with COBOL for whatever reason. Right. I don't even know why.
Running against mainframe installations.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a big deal. That's a big deal.
It is really big.
Yeah, because 80% of the world's data, corporate data, is still on a mainframe. Right. So this is sounding encouraging. So I drink the Kool-Aid, and now what are my gotchas?
Gotchas are, I think the big gotcha is Docker. You have to have bought off on the idea that you're going to have to use the sidecar pattern because they adopted that as the core container pattern that they adopted. Even if it's a process, it's still a sidecar. You're running your pods here and the other pods over here, and you're putting your Dapper stuff there and your stuff is over here. So those are the gotchas. You have to play by those rules, and you're, if you're gonna do like open telemetry, it needs to be in the Dapper one. You have Kubernetes operators in there. You can't mix it into, I've got a really cool framework idea that you want to mix into your microservice that might cause an issue with having that with the other pod that is Dapper.
Right. So now it says that just the way some places say we're a Java shop, we're a .NET shop, we're a Python shop. Now some places are going to have to advertise themselves as we're a Dapper shop. We're a Dapper shop. There is no choice there. Right.
Don, is there a coexistence with existing frameworks like you talked about Istio or others, or is this no? It sounds like you're going to have to go Dapper if you're Dapper. You're not. Sharing.
I mean, you could probably make it work because fundamentally is, with Istio, as long as you suppose an ingress point, you could have the two talk together. That isn't a problem. You're just saying that.
Are you talking from scratch apps, or can you apply it to an existing?
You might be able to apply it. I haven't really looked at that. I'm not. I don't see that it's impossible. I just don't want to say it's awesome because it probably requires some serious exploration and some good things to figure out how not to screw up all that sort of horizon routing crap that could break. And then you're
proceed with caution.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
And at the end of this, we'll put this. There is a dapper.org or something. Is there?
Dapper.io and something else.
APR.io. Yeah, we'll put up a little thing on the screen so people can go there. Yeah, I've looked at it. It's a compelling technology. There's no question about it.
Are there certain areas that either Bob you see that this would be very adaptable to, or Don you're seeing it being adopted so far? Who's looking for this problem to be solved?
I view it's multi-cloud people and people that want to build a lot of microservices. Because if you look at companies like Netflix, they built a lot of internal technology to solve this because they had to deal with it, and that's where then Kubernetes came up. But Kubernetes is at such a low level of a DevOps level that it isn't always the programmers don't just jump into DevOps and go, let's go swimming in these DevOps tool chains because I don't really love them.
Yeah, and the important thing to point out here, which is sort of my battle cry, is there's a real risk here of the concept of microservices becoming a bright, shiny thing. Because everybody wants to be cool. I mean, that's just the way it is. It almost goes back to, there was a joke back in 2000 when multimedia was the big thing, is that we were going to actually do an IPO around multimedia toasters, right? It didn't matter, just the toaster was going to pop up, but we were going to call it a multimedia toaster, and we were just going to make a boatload of money on it. Fortunately, neither the toaster nor the IPO happened. But on the other hand, people they think this thing called microservices, oh, great. Everybody's got to jump on board to be cool and current and be able to hire into that talent pool. But we need to point out that microservices aren't for everybody. And the litmus I use is, and please, Don, correct me if I'm wrong here, but I'm saying, look, if you have under 100,000 users and you have low revision cycles, if your revision cycle is on the order of 30 days or even 14 days, and you have a monolithic application that's working for you, and you can revise that monolithic application pretty reliably at a given cadence, like, you got to be prepared, man. Microservices is going to cost you a boatload of money. And you better make sure that that investment is worth the benefit you're going to get, my opinion. But I see it happening over and over again. People just say, I got to have my microservices, and they completely underestimate the amount of work and support and plumbing that's required to make it work effectively. Now, if you're Facebook and you're supporting 100 million users and you have revision cycles that are hourly, now you're talking some big money, and the trade-off becomes justifiable. But we need to be very clear about that.
I don't disagree. I mean, if you're not everyone needs microservices. It is the bright, shiny thing. It's just that if you're going to be deployed, when you reach that certain X, which is maybe it's 40, 100 microservices, you've got lots of bounded context, you have lots of asynchronous, all this other stuff, then these technologies make sense. But, if you and I were going to go make this toaster thing, and plug it into like an Xbox, we sure in hell don't need this stuff.
Right, and also there's a big difference too between green and brownfield. if somebody hire, we're going to go out and hire a team brand new. We haven't written a bit of code yet, and you're saying we're going to microservice the daylights out of it. Is the wisdom of a microservice architecture appropriate? Maybe yes, maybe no, but implementing it is going to be a boatload easier than going up to an existing code base and having to retrofit that guy to make it work. I mean, at what can I say, a significant layer, maybe 10x cost. But, some people want to do that. Go on.
Well, yeah, there are companies who want to do it. I mean, I've seen that when I did a thing at the microservices meetup, there were companies that talked to me afterwards who wanted to do microservices that didn't make any sense, but because they were so convinced it was the be all and the end all, they were going there and they didn't need to do it at all.
Right. And if you're right, so the thing is, you want to have fun. How about this? Do a simple asynchronous microservice, which means no HTTP. Everything is message driven. And you want to have fun, write your microservice, have your developers write the unit tests, but then do the integration tests around that. Have fun. Tell me how you're going to do tests in an asynchronous manner that are reliable and easy to maintain. Tell me that. And we'll say, oh, gee, I never thought about that. Well, that's your world.
Well, yeah, and they have to have accepted eventual consistency. When you start saying, okay, your order microservice is very consistent. When you go to get your customer, that may not be consistent at the same time, so you have to expect that not everything is, we don't have those ACID properties once you distribute things, ACID is all out of the plane.
Yep. Yeah, and you have to go back, learn your CAP theorem, my friends at home, learn your CAP theorem, consistency, availability, and partition. Those are words to live by. Anyway, how are we doing on time, Mitch?
We're doing real well. I'm thinking let's kind of turn this as a way to wrap up or kind of bring conclusion to this. I'm really curious where we are in the hype versus the adoption curve of this, right? You were talking about the hype. Really, we're talking about the hype of microservices and why do you need it? I mean, you're not going to go down. You're not going to go down the Dapper route unless you're doing microservices. Is that a correct assumption?
It's a correct assumption. I mean, I don't think you'd do it. It would be an interesting way to learn distributed programming without having to do all the plumbing. So that for a programmer, it's a good learning experience, regardless of for that, which is not relevant to the business.
Okay, so that kind of completes checkbox one. Second is, are you much better off starting with Dapper now that we have it, assuming that you buy whatever premises that you buy about adopting Dapper, versus kind of going current, I'll say old school, it's not old school, but current best practices without it? In other words, if you're starting greenfield, to your question, Bob, is it so obvious you would go out and at least look at Dapper as a way to get started, or is it sort of still in the experimental category, learning it, seeing what its best uses are?
The only reason I think it's not in the experimental category is O'Reilly's publishing a book in September. They got so much demand that they'll have a book done that they started in March and it'll be done in September. So that was an interesting fact that, they don't normally, it was relatively fast on their list to get a book out there. So it says something about it. I don't know exactly what, but it's interesting.
So maybe a road sign that says promising, wouldn't bet the farm on it quite yet.
Yeah.
Right. It'd be interesting to take a look at the download and contribution rate too. It's on GitHub, right?
Yeah, it's been pretty high. They had a pretty good push, because just writing distributed programming stuff sucks and nobody really wants to do it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, let's get that part right. Yeah, but on the other hand, it is a bright, shiny thing.
This is microservices. Well, I'm thinking about what you're describing of, as things get smaller so it can move faster, they get more complex too, which is what you're describing around microservices. And at some point it can get out of hand. Like you were talking, Bob, maybe there's, I got to deliver, once every 14 days versus once every hour. That might be one threshold for looking at something like Dapper. Is there a size of the service mesh that you're trying to implement at some point? Managing this behemoth comes as its own set of problems like a monolith does. Is that sort of a threshold to look at Dapper?
It is, because you kind of because once you start doing microservices, frequently you have an API gateway for the public, and then you have a service mesh that's internal to your company, because that's a different, one's going east-west, one's going north-south. So you have to have a way to manage the services inside and then the services outside. So then you have to bring in other technologies. It's not as simple,
So things have gotten smaller, gotten doing faster, got more complex, and that results in things like we need traceability for visibility into
Right.
microservices. Does Dapper help with that at all?
Yeah, it builds it in. You actually can build a new open telemetry and all that's built in. But once again, that's not a freebie. If you don't come up with the correlation ID, which is normally a GUID that everything traces, then you have logs, but you can't figure out how they correlate to each other. You go, well, Bob's fortune cookie sent it off to the Chinese restaurant, but we can't figure out where it went after it went there.
Right.
Right.
It's still microservices underneath all that. And
So to bring back, I mean, there are technologies out there that will provide traceability through the cluster. I'm thinking of VM's Wavefront, and Datadog does to some degree. So is there integration from those people into Dapper?
Datadog started looking at it. They're starting to see how they can. Splunk has made a few statements about what they want to do with it. I don't know whether what that means. It's something they said on LinkedIn, which could mean nothing. Or it could mean more.
Right. So supporting the correlation ID, which I can, I've written extensively about the correlation ID. It's a one little GUID that can change the whole way your business works. But a lot of people just still don't support it. But without that ability to trace requests through a distributed track asynchronously, you're flying blind. Right?
Yeah. And that's the thing that people who decide to do microservices, those things they don't even think about. They honestly, because they're like, oh, we just wrote some code and we published it with a framework. I'm like, well, how do you know how it's working? They're like, oh, we read the logs. Okay, how do you know that's working?
Well, the good news is, let me toot my own horn here. The last project I architected, it was the correlation ID was built in. Nothing went out that couldn't be traced. There you go. That was a rule. Nice.
Start from a good place. Yeah. But go ahead, Bob.
I just want to put in a plug for the correlation ID. It's a 10-second concept. The correlation ID says this: when you get a request, you look in the HTTP header, and there is a field, a header field called X correlation-ID. If it's there, you take that GUID, which is attached to the correlation ID, and if you make a response, you pass that GUID on. If it's not there, what you do is you add it and then pass it on, because the agreement is to downstream people is they're going to look for that correlation ID and they're going to pass it on if it's there. If not, they'll create their own. However, that's conventional. It's not systemic. What you really need is a framework that will do it for you automatically. Very much like a site, that's something you just inject into the cluster that'll make everything observable. But some people do and some people don't.
It's at that kind of social contract level. We agree to do it, or right.
But as Don says, if wishes were horses, beggars were doves. Do something. I don't know.
So one thing to give you a forewarning here, Bob, I'd like your opinion about this. So Don's a little farther down the curve of working with Dapper and hands-on with the learning, et cetera. As you assess it, I'm not asking you to make any grand predictions that we know, good chance we'll always be wrong on those things. But what's your assessment of Dapper? I mean, why would you find it interesting? Why would you look at it? How closely would you follow it? Is this?
I pay attention. I pay attention. First of all, you can't. Microsoft has done a good job over the last 5 years of playing well with the kids. Okay, Microsoft has sort of gone out of the business of trying to, what was it called? Extend and exterminate, right? And that used to be their mantra. That really was. And that's one of the reasons I just couldn't do it anymore. But once the leadership changed and the current CEO came in and they're saying, look, we got to learn to play. We got to learn to play well. It's not to saying they're saying they're not focused on profitability and they're not focused on market share, but they're focused on it in a different way. So the fact that they're sponsoring this thing called Dapper and they're addressing a real problem. I mean, for any of us that have gone down the route of having to support service discovery, how do I make it so that I can do a whole lot of switch and change behind the scenes and still not affect how things are represented to the public, right? That fundamental problem, which is there when you're dealing with high revision, fast change environments, it's critical. And service discovery companies have built their wherewithal around service discovery. HashiCorp comes to mind. Kubernetes has internal service discovery built right in. So the fact that they're going to start addressing that in a technology which is, what Don says, 2 days for an expert programmer is nothing, right? Whereas adopting a technology such as Console or even Envoy can take a week, 2 weeks, maybe even a month just to get it down. So this is important. This is important. What we need to be aware of is the notion of what can I say, the single technology lock. That's real. But there's always a lock at some level, right? I mean, there is. You just can't get away from it. But we can minimize it. And as an executive, what I would be saying, okay, look, you're really asking me to do a way of life. I want to make sure this way of life has legs, that it's going to be around for a long time, that I can hire people into it. And if I can't hire those people, can I at least get them productive in a short amount of time? And Dapper's checking off all those boxes. And their developer experience is good. It's good. When I farted, excuse the expression, I played around with it, but I wasn't like, what's going on here? I don't get it. Right. And I've had technologies where that happens. And this one is, okay, cool. Is there a lot more to learn? Yes. Is it effective? Yes. Will it solve a very big problem with little pain? Yeah, it seems to. So I'd be paying attention.
It seems like if it checks the boxes and it's solving a real problem, trying to make the complexity less complex or manageable.
Right. The real problem.
That's an interesting space to be in.
Yeah.
So let's wrap things up just with some resources. One or both of you mentioned the site dapr.io, Dapper.io, is one resource. Are there others to look at for more? I mean, obviously there's GitHub and things like that.
There are a lot of articles where people have built example programs in C# and Node, and there's quite a few different things out there. NewStack did a whole thing about why Dapper is important, just a high level. You're starting to see people publish things, attempting things, But it's all out there. You can look at the code. You can do whatever you want. You just have to decide what level you want to go to. Or you just download the SDK and just use it and don't even think about it.
Yeah, and I'm a YouTuber, so I found a lot of stuff on YouTube for it also, with references back to code. So yeah, it's there. It's not cryptic by any stretch of the imagination.
Okay, good. I'm trying to think. There was something else I was going to ask about resource. You were talking about the whole traceability issue and how to write code properly. Or is there some good suggested resources for that, Bob?
Oh.
You'd written about.
Oh, jeepers. I don't know. Give me a call.
The
call. I mean, I don't know if Don's taking calls these days, but right. Fix my code for free, right?
Yeah, send your code samples to.
Right. Allow me to come to your house and make you dinner after I'm through fixing your code for free. Yeah.
Looking forward to that email.
Yeah,
right?
But no, send me an email. I can send stuff on. Send us an email. Yeah, there's a lot out there. It's not something you can do in 5 seconds.
Okay.
No, it's not instantaneous. If it was, everybody would be doing it.
Yeah.
So wrapping last reference to look up, you're wearing your robotics t-shirt, Don. So I have to give you opportunity to promote first. I know that's a passion of yours.
I'll just do a high level, First is, a worldwide robotics program. It's all over the world. It's got programs from, Junior Lego League, FTC, FRC. So, there's, lots of kids who do it. It's been around for 30 years. It was founded by Dean Kamen. You can look up First on the web and learn all about it, and there's always mentoring. Anybody who's super technical or has business knowledge can help kids, and it's a great organization.
Something you both share is helping other people learn about technology. So great thing, great attribute and thing to contribute back. Thanks, guys. Good conversation. Enjoyed it very much. I enjoyed watching the tennis match. We'll see you next time.
Okay.
Thanks. Have a great day.
SecurityBoulevard.com is the leading resource for news, analysis, and education on challenges facing the cybersecurity industry. SecurityBoulevard.com covers all aspects of cybersecurity, including data security, DevSecOps, cloud security, application security, network security, security threats, and more. SecurityBoulevard.com has the largest selection of security content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.securityboulevard.com to learn more. SecurityBoulevard.com, home of Security Bloggers Network.
Thanks so much, Mitchell. Another great analyst corner. And what a way to finish off today's show for Tuesday, June 9th. Guys, thanks for joining us. Hope you enjoyed all of the great content today, especially that Liz Rice presentation from TechStrong Con. All of the TechStrong Con presentations are still up on TechStrongCon.com. If you go there, you can register and go into the virtual environment. Of course, there's no live chat or anything, but you can see all of the presentations. You can actually visit all of the booths and download all of the collateral and everything that's up there for you. So that's TechStrongCon.com. Anyway, just a reminder, we won't be up with a new show tomorrow as we move to a Monday, Tuesday, Thursday profile. We will be playing one of best of the first 50 tomorrow. So if you want to listen in at TechStrong TV, we will be replaying one of our previous shows, and we'll be back Thursday with all new fresh content. So until then, this is Alan Schimmel. Be well, be safe, be strong, TechStrong. We're out.